Maverick News presents The Rick Walker Show. Defrag your mind.
Good evening, Maverick family. Welcome back to the Maverick News Channel. I'm Rick Walker. Welcome new viewers from all over the world. Great to have you with us. It was a big show last night, and we have another cool show here tonight as well. We're going to kind of rewind a little bit and dip into some of the live stuff going on at this Republican Presidential Forum in Des Moines, Iowa, hosted by Tucker Carlson tonight. We'll give you some of the highlights. It's been ongoing throughout the day, but we'll give you the key moments when the various presidential hopefuls came on stage and went up against Tucker Carlson, who honestly today has been pretty hard on some of these candidates, asking just the right questions and striking just the right tone, in my view. I think he's done an excellent job. He's not throwing any softballs. He's holding them to account and holding their feet to the fire, making them answer the tough questions and the right questions as well. You know, he's right on target, asking the questions that are relevant to each of the candidates, not just generic stuff. It's targeted. It's insightful. So he's given some real thought to what he was going to ask, and it's also the way he's asking it. You'll see what I mean. He's doing a great job at this family-focused forum in Des Moines for the Republicans. Now, I have to say, Donald Trump not there, skipped this, said he had a scheduling conflict. I don't know if that's really the case or if he skipped it for strategic reasons. I think he had a lot to lose and probably not as much to gain as these other candidates. He has such a huge lead over all the others in the field by at least 20 or 30 points, his closest rival being Ron DeSantis, that I can understand why he might have, why he decided to probably just skip this one. Why risk anything when you don't have to? Especially when you have somebody like Tucker Carlson asking tough questions. Anyway, stay with me. We'll come back and then we'll get right into it. I think the first guy up will be DeSantis because we're going to take them. I mean, he's been speaking on stage, so we're going to get into that right now when we come back.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, so first up, Ron DeSantis, closest contender. If RFK Jr. wasn't in the race on the Democrat side, I think DeSantis would actually be getting a lot more attention. It's been a very strange election season or pre-election season, I guess, really, the primaries. But it's been strange because we're seeing this overlap, this dovetailing between the Democrats and the Republicans, because there's such a populist element to some of the candidates, including RFK Jr., including Donald Trump, of course, with the MAGA movement, which I think is very populist in focus, and DeSantis as well, who I think who is trying to peel off some of that MAGA support, and I think that was very clear in the campaign video that they released, Mamas for DeSantis, earlier this week, which we ran for you, and it was very focused on family values, gender ideology, all those conservative things that DeSantis is focused on down in Florida, where he says Florida is where woke goes to die. So anyway, let's crank this up and go straight to Ron DeSantis now in Des Moines, Iowa, at the first Republican presidential forum. Hang on just a second here. Okay, here we go. Ron DeSantis
for February, but I love it. So congratulations on everything you've been doing. You signed a ban on abortion after 6 weeks in Florida. Would you do the same as president nationally?
Well, I'm very proud to say Kim Reynolds is here, and she signed a great heartbeat bill today. We were able to do that in Florida. We had a lot of opposition to that. I'm proud to have been a pro-life governor, and I will be a pro-life president. So, I mean, of course, I want to sign pro-life legislation. I think it's something that we need to develop a culture of life in this country. If you look over the last 50 years, we allowed practices that were barbaric. Post-birth abortion, when you have a fully formed baby 6-7 months in. And I don't think Rome's built in a day. I think it's going to take time to make progress in some parts of the country. But as president, I will be somebody who will use the bully pulpit to support governors like Kim Reynolds when she's got a bill, other states as they advance the cause of life. It is a critical issue, and it's one I'm happy to have done. And oh, by the way, this is an issue where I had a lot of supporters who were averse to me on this. Donors saying they didn't want to support me if I stood for life. It's been written about how I lost a lot of really big supporters. Some of them just aren't pro-life. Some of them think it's a political liability. And at the end of the day, you get into office to be able to do what's right. And you've got to stand on principle, and you've got to say, why am I here? If you're here to contort yourself into a pretzel, to try to not have to take on big issues, to take the political road that's easier traveled, then you're not somebody that's dependable. So we stood up. We did what was right. Yeah, we lost some support as a result of that. But if I had a chance to do it again, I'd do it every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
So can you, so what you're saying is people need to be brought over to that. I mean, you have to govern by consensus. In a democracy, you have to convince people. So can you just give us your quick pitch? You're speaking to someone of goodwill and good faith, a decent person who has a different position from you on abortion. How do you bring them to your position? What do you say?
Well, look, I think that one of the most impactful moments of my life was with my better half right over there. The first child we had very early in the pregnancy, we're going in, getting an ultrasound, and I hear this whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. I'm like, what is that? That's your daughter's heartbeat. Wow. That changed me. I mean, I was pro-life at the time, but that really had an impact on me. And with science and technology, I think we have brought more people over. But at the end of the day, to do what Governor Reynolds just signed or what we did in Florida, a baby that has a detectable heartbeat, that is a life. And we're better off when everybody counts. We're better off when everybody's given a chance. And so we should stand for life.
Amen. So I don't know if this is like too parochial to bring up here, but all of America is moving to Florida, so this is like an issue. We've reduced all environmental concerns to climate, but there's still an actual environment, and Florida has a red tide problem that seems to be getting worse, and then there's some indication that it's hurting people neurologically, and it seems like kind of a disaster. What can be done about that?
Well, we've actually created an infrastructure in Florida, and I think it's a good thing because, like, the Democrats and the left, they talk about global warming. They're going to change the climate. them forcing you an electrical vehicle is not going to change the climate when China is building a new coal plant every week. I mean, so just give me the break. This is trying to control your behavior. It's social engineering, and it's not something that's going to work. So what I've said in Florida is, okay, Democrats do that. I'm actually going to focus on the environment that Floridians like and enjoy, and that makes our state unique. So we tackled both blue-green algae, Everglades restoration, and red tide. We've created infrastructures and task force. We have money that will go in to do. So there's a lot of experiments being done on red tide right now with the program we put in, but you have to make a decision. Maybe it works in a lab, but if you do it out in the Gulf of Mexico, is it going to have any other cascading effects? So that's what they're studying right now. We think that there's some things that are going to be very good. Now, red tide is natural. I think most people know that. It's been detected going back into the 1800s, but what can we do to mitigate it, and what can we do to prevent being exacerbated? But we've done very well on environment, not because I'm doing kooky liberal things, but because I'm focusing on things that actually impact the daily lives of Floridians. And oh, by the way, I've never come to Iowa without someone coming up to me that they tell me they spend time in Marco Island or Sarasota or wherever, and I see half the Midwest down in Southwest Florida during the winter months.
And that's a good thing. But when you see half of New Jersey down there, does that make you worry?
So here's the truth. When I became governor, and I was born and raised in Florida, I had never seen a California license plate in the state of Florida in my life. And all of a sudden, we start seeing California plates. My supporters are like, uh-oh, who are these people? Because remember, I may have won by 20 points in November, but usually Florida races were 1%. So if you bring in 50,000 Californians, 50,000 people from New York, all of a sudden, it could be a blue state. We would have supporters go to supermarkets in like Palm Beach, find every New York or New Jersey license plate, put a flyer in the windshield and say, do not vote down here the way they vote up there. But what ended up happening was, I think we drew people who believed in what we were doing. It wasn't just these were liberals who just wanted no state income tax. There may have been some of those, but I think most of these people said, you know what? Florida's a free state. I'm not dealing with these lockdowns. Florida has kids in school. I'm not going to not have my kids be able to be in school. Florida has a 50-year low in the crime rate. I don't want to see rioting in my neighborhood. So there were a whole bunch of reasons why people did it, but the political orientation of it actually turned out pretty good.
So you're getting the good ones.
We're getting good ones. And you know what? We're converting people too. I mean, that's, I think, something that we have to do as a movement. You can't just preach only to the choir. I want to get some other people who may not have voted Republican in the past and get them on our team. And we've done that in Florida in record numbers. And I think it can be done across the country. We're up against a movement that is parroting woke ideology, that their message to the American people is that men can get pregnant. Really? That you should swim on the men's swim team for 3 years, switch to the women's team, and you can be the women's national champion? Most people don't buy that. And so I think we have an opportunity to really capture a lot of voters by representing a platform of common sense and sanity and traditional American values.
Amen. So as president, you'd be in charge pretty much single-handedly of America's foreign policy. So with that in mind, I have to ask you about Ukraine. So in the spring, you described the war in Ukraine as a, quote, territorial dispute. You issued a statement saying it was a territorial dispute that was not central to America's national interest. There was an outcry over this. And then pretty soon after, you seemed to change your view and describe Putin as a war criminal and say that it was central to America's foreign policy. Why did you change, and where are you now?
So the last part I did not say. I served in Iraq during the Iraq campaign in Fallujah. I was attached to U.S. Navy SEAL Team 1. And remember, it started on what WMD. Then we had Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Then it was create a democracy. Then it was that. And so the lesson that I learned from there is if you're going to commit to do military, whether it's aid or whether it's troops, you need to have a concrete idea of what you're trying to achieve. And so from the time I got out of the sandbox and landed back in the United States 15 years ago until the present, I've always felt that. And so my critique of the DC foreign policy elite is that they are doing a blank check policy without telling us when we will have achieved our objective. And I believe that today, and I believe that then. Now, because you dissent from the DC foreign policy elite, they then try to smear you and say, oh, you must be for Putin. I've always thought Putin's a bad guy. I still think he's a bad guy, but that's a separate question for a leader who's got to look at the world in very clear-eyed glasses. You know that it's not all peaches and cream out there, and you have to make a judgment about what's in America's national interest. And so that's the position that I believe, and I also believe that I wish the DC elites cared as much about our border as they do about the Ukraine-Russia border. Because there's people pouring into this country. We have people dying from fentanyl overdose. The cartels are running the show. And what I've said is this is something on day one, declare a national emergency, mobilize all resources, including the military, stop the invasion, yes, build the wall, but most importantly, authorize the Border Patrol, authorize our military to deal with the cartels. If they're breaking into our country, bringing product, if I'm in charge, that's going to be the last thing they do because they're going to end up stone cold dead.
Amen. So what, we just go back.
No, so, but
you've been a great critique. So what is the goal, do you think, in Ukraine? When do we know we've achieved it?
They will not define it. And
what do you think it should be?
I think the goal should be to have a sustainable peace in Europe. Okay, we don't want there to be war breaking out. There have been a lot of people that have been killed, displaced. It's a horrible thing. But you have to provide an articulation of where you're going to go to get there. And my fear is right now is they're basically doing an open-ended conflict. This is going to be a multi-year quagmire. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to die. And there's not going to be much facts change on the ground. And the dispute at this point, or the war at this point, is not whether Ukraine's government is going to fall. They're fighting over territory on the far eastern part of the country between Russia and Ukraine. And that's kind of where this is at. So the question is, okay, how do you get that to where we can stop this? And also, from our national interest, this is humiliating for our country that we're running out of ammunition. They're now trying to mobilize troops, U.S. troops, to go to Europe when we have a major threat in the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese Communist Party, who they're basically given a free pass to. As president, I would prioritize the threats to our national security. The top threat to this country is China. It's China's ambitions. It's China's industrial capacity. It's the CCP's ability to pollute our culture, impact our universities. Incidentally, in Florida, we got rid of the Confucius Institutes that they put in universities. We cracked down on them being able to do research dollars to our universities, and we banned any purchase of land by the CCP in the state of Florida.
So given that
the thing, though, you have to do what's based on our interests. You can't subcontract out our interests to a foreign leader. You can't want it to go on because it'll be good for defense contractors or, globalist investors. It's all about what's in our interest. And I think we're basically in a situation with our foreign policy. We're providing a blanket security to Europe. They're not paying their fair share, and we're not doing what we need to do to project power in the Pacific. At the end of the day, the CCP respects hard power. And I'm concerned that because a strong America can deter conflict, I think a weak America may be on the path to inviting conflict with China. And if we continue to be weak abroad and allow our culture to deteriorate here at home, we can have a situation where our kids or grandkids are studying, memorizing 37 different pronouns in Mandarin. And we can't have that. So we've got to do better as a country. We need to reverse the decline of this country because it is happening very, very quickly.
So you inherit this mess a year and a half from now, say, and let's just say it's static, it's where it is right now. What do you do about it? How do you act?
One, Europe needs to do more. This is their backyard. We have NATO countries that don't produce support for their own defenses, and we're supposed to do it, and we're taking away weapons and ammo that could go to respond to contingencies overseas. So we would do more in terms of the Pacific, and the goal should be to bring it to a conclusion. You bring it to a conclusion in a way that's a sustainable peace and that doesn't reward aggression. And you have to be able to use different levers that you have. I mean, for example, one of the leverages I would use vis-a-vis Russia is I would do our own energy exploration and send it over to Europe so they don't have to rely on Putin. I would stop giving Iran a free pass like Biden is because they're funding Russia. So we have some ability to use this, but the goal should be we cannot have a quagmire that goes on for years and years. And seeing Biden put those troops there, I can tell you, we cannot have American troops in Ukraine. That is a total non-starter.
So why? I mean, you've got a whole Congress, and there are a ton of Republicans there. They claim they run the House. I haven't heard anybody say that. Why?
Well, no, I think some of them tried to say that there should be.
Yeah, they lost badly.
No,
they got 33 votes.
They did, but I'm just.
Yeah.
I think there are some people that said you need to define the mission before you're able to send any American tax dollars over. No, by the way, they haven't even been able to account for all this. So we don't know who's coming across the southern border. We don't know where all the money sent to Ukraine is gone. We don't know whose cocaine it was in the White House. I mean,
what's your guess on that? I'm sorry. I mean,
let me put it this way. We have issues in Florida with parents' rights, and they're trying to put pornography in the schools. I think a lot of you have seen this. It's sad that this is the case. We allow the parents to blow the whistle. You can get it out. And our message to people has basically been like, look, adult material does not belong in a fifth grade classroom. If you want to see the pornography, just check out Hunter's laptop. I'm sure you can have that till your heart's content.
Is that available in your schools?
Hopefully not.
My kids are older. I don't know. So, how concerned are you that in the wake of whatever the next economic disruption that we're going to face is, and everyone kind of feels like maybe there's something coming, that will wind up with digital currency issued by the central bank?
Well, if I am the president on day one, we will nix central bank digital currency. Done, dead, not happening in this country. In the state of Florida, because the Fed has been talking about this.
Oh, yeah.
And what the Fed said was, well, we wouldn't do it without consulting the legislative and executive branches. Ideally, we would get a law passed. No. That's not how the Constitution says. It's only ideal that you get a law passed. You would have to get a law passed. I don't think Congress would pass that. So I think the Fed may try to do something unilaterally. So what we did in Florida is we basically passed a law that says we do not recognize CBDC in the state of Florida. And I think other states are probably going to follow suit. That will jam their ability to do it through executive action. They don't have authority to do it. There'd be lawsuits and everything. For those who don't know what CBDC is, what they want to do, and this is tied in with like Davos, World Economic Forum, all these people. They want the Fed, they want to get rid of cash. They want no cryptocurrency. And they want this to be the sole form of legal tender. And they have said this publicly at like Davos and these other places. It will allow them to prohibit, quote, undesirable purchases like fuel and ammunition. And so the minute you give them the power to do this, they are going to impose a social credit system on this country. CBDC is a massive threat to American liberty. On January 20th, 2025, it goes to the ash heap of history in this country.
So if you were to become president, and previous presidents have discovered this, so you and the vice president, but you're the only elected leaders in an executive branch that's the largest human organization in history. Millions of people, work for you. And a lot of them just hate you because they're all partisan Democrats. And they work to subvert you from day one. And again, we've just seen this at scale. What do you do about that? Like, what do you do about the FBI or the CIA or agencies that are heavily armed and have intel capacities that you don't have, and like they're vast? How do you manage that?
With me on day one, you get a new director of the FBI. We need that. That's going to happen. So I think a couple things. One, there are thousands of positions in the executive branch that are appointed by the president. You got to have all those people ready to go to be submitted to the Senate in January of 2025. You can't wait 2 years to fill all the positions because then these career bureaucrats, they just take over. So you got to have your people in there on day one. You also have to have certain character of people. Like if you're the attorney general, everything you do to deal with the DOJ and the weaponization of government, deal with the FBI, the press is going to rake you over the coals. The left is going to rake you over the coals. The Democrats, they're all going to rake you over the coals. You either are down for that or you're not. And if you can't handle that, if you don't have the backbone to do that, you will fail at that job. So you need people, and I look at different folks in government, like on the Supreme Court. I would look to Clarence Thomas as the example because he doesn't budge. He doesn't care what the media says about him. They've smeared him 6 ways from Sunday. He does what he thinks is right. So you got to have those people. And then you have levers that you can pull. I believe Article 2 of the Constitution means the president has the executive authority. We just say these bureaucrats somehow can't be held accountable. I disagree with that. I think you can fire him. If we have an FBI agent going to harass a pro-life activist like they did Mark Houck and send a SWAT team, I'd fire them immediately. When you have FBI colluding with big tech to censor dissent, I would fire those people. Had I been president 2020, Anthony Fauci would have been fired, and you've got to be willing to do it.
I mean, the censorship regime in place during the last presidential election, and by the way, I think it remains in place in the federal agencies, telling information providers, the social media companies, what they can and cannot run. No one's been held accountable. Meanwhile, Julian Assange is still in prison thanks to our efforts. Would you pardon him, and would you hold those people who are violating the First Amendment accountable?
So these people that violated the First Amendment, yeah, they need to be held accountable for that. People died as a result of that because they were censoring truthful information about COVID that if people would have adopted those policies, the country would have been better off. Individual states would have been better off. And so I think it had a profound effect. The fact that they censored dissent on COVID meant some kids got locked out of school for a year. The fact that they censored dissent on COVID meant that some people took some of these booster shots when they didn't need to, and they ended up having an adverse reaction. So it had major, major impact. So I think not just with the censorship, I think everything involving COVID, I think there needs to be major, major accountability, because if there's not, if you don't have a reckoning, they are going to do it again. They are going to do it again. Now, in terms of using pardon, my goal is to end the weaponization of government. And that involves firing people. It involves taking parts of the DOJ and putting them in other states. Iowa, if you guys want a part of the DOJ, I'll send it out here, send it to Alabama, wherever. And we're going to do that. We're going to take power out of Washington. But part of what you need to do, if you have a two-tiered system of justice, you need to make sure if there's some people that got away that shouldn't have, they need to face the music. And if there are other people that are getting targeted through abuse of government, then there needs to be use of the pardon power. So the day after the election, we're going to open up an ability for people to submit applications, ask for the pardon based on whether they were treated dissimilarly or whether the government mobilized against them. And so we're going to do it the front end of the administration. I'm not going to wait till my last day in office. Do it the front end. And if people are doing that, and that's part of ensuring a single standard of justice, we will be willing to use the pardon power. It's going to be done on a case-by-case basis because I'm a governor and I've actually had to look at these things, and you owe it to everybody to do that. But we will be issuing pardons, and that'll be determined based on the facts and circumstances at the time.
We know that the U.S. government reads the private communications of American citizens by the tens of millions without a warrant. And everyone knows this. It's been revealed. They've admitted it. And no one has moved to stop it. Do you think that there's a good reason to allow this? How can that be?
No. I mean, I think the federal government has a responsibility to protect us from foreign threats. We're going to have intelligence capabilities overseas, but to turn those on our own citizens, especially with this government's behavior, is totally untenable. I am going to go in and declassify or put as much stuff out as I can. I think that you guys have a right to know things that happened 60, 70 years ago that the government's kept under wraps. Now, obviously, if things that are more recent, if there's stuff, I mean, you have to make those judgments. But my default is going to be that they're going to have a high burden to justify why it shouldn't be public for some of these main things that we all talk about that have occurred in the past, because the government uses classification as a way to evade accountability for itself. I think there is a legitimate use of classified information, but it's like what should be classified and what actually is is like so much more. And so it's all about protecting their power. But it's a huge, huge problem in how they've conducted this. And to turn the government on the American people, that's the founding fathers' worst nightmare.
So let me just end with a shallow question based on speculation. Do you think Biden will be the Democratic nominee?
Honestly, I go back and forth because as an incumbent president, unless he's willing to step aside, I don't think they can get him out of there. On the other hand, I'm fully prepared to have a Florida-California showdown and let the people choose what's the better vision for the United States of America, because I'm very confident that the freedom in Florida is what more people would choose rather than the public defecation on the streets of San Francisco.
Governor Ron DeSantis, for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless.
Wow. I got to tell you, I was impressed with that. Very, very impressed. He's so well spoken. He has such a grasp of the issues, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He is targeting in very specific ways issues that will allow him to peel off support from Trump. He's staking a claim in Trump country with a lot of these issues. You know, you're talking about COVID, vaccinations. I've said many times that is Trump's Achilles heel. That's where he is vulnerable. And Trump just hit him hard right there. Trump deciding not to show up here today for this forum. After that, I can't help but think that that was a mistake on Donald Trump's part, because Ron DeSantis just scored some big points there in that interview with Tucker Carlson. This is not a debate here today at this first Republican presidential forum. It's not a debate. Each of the candidates is coming up and they're being interviewed, essentially, grilled by Tucker Carlson. But DeSantis fared very well there. Carlson did ask some difficult, some tough questions. But DeSantis, I mean, he handled every single one of them extremely well. He is very well spoken, a polished politician, but he not only has a good grasp of the issues, you can tell that this is a guy who knows how the system works. That's why he has been effective as governor down in Florida. He knows how to get things done. Now, I have to say that his campaign kickoff on Twitter, in Twitter Spaces, that was a dumpster fire. Whether that was his fault or not, you can assess for yourself. But that's behind him now, and he just performed extremely well there. I would say he's, in many respects, he's better spoken than Trump. But Trump, because his language is sort of, how shall I put it, less polished, he appeals more to, I think, his base. He has, I think, a greater appeal to the working class, the blue collar segment, labor, that end of the populist movement, more so than DeSantis. DeSantis, I think, is, he's better polished. He's got more polish. But that almost sets him apart from that element of the populist movement, the MAGA crowd. He doesn't, I think, because he comes off maybe a little more white collar, even though Trump is a billionaire, Trump comes off in a way that he appeals to, I think, just average, ordinary Americans, because he speaks like an average, ordinary American. His language isn't always spot on. He's not always grammatically correct. DeSantis isn't either, but he is more polished. So he comes off to me as more of like a white collar kind of candidate. But I mean, look, these issues that that were touched on, Ukraine. For me, he actually gained a little bit of ground there, because I've been worried that DeSantis is kind of a hawk in hiding, that he will prolong this war, that he won't stop it. But he made it very clear, no American troops on the ground in there. He wants an end to the conflict. And again, he is a systems guy. He's a results kind of candidate, or he's a guy who wants to, clearly define objectives and then lay out a plan to get there. And that is not what has happened in Ukraine at all. And he's just pointed that out. So that's very refreshing as well. I got to tell you, again, I was very impressed, because this is a guy who has made it very clear that he not only wants a plan, but he actually identified exactly, he told us what he would do. Says day one, he gets in there, you get a new FBI director. You're going to fire the director of the FBI. He's going to fire bureaucrats, public servants. Says he would have fired Fauci, which is exactly what the public wanted Trump to do, and Trump never did. In fact, Trump kind of came into office and then surrounded himself eventually, not long after coming into office, found that, the bench that he had wasn't very deep in terms of talent and expertise, because the team that he carried with him from the election into the White House came up short in many respects. So he had to kind of go back to the swamp to get some of those people with different expertise, like Bolton, to come in and shore up his team. As a result, the swamp that he was trying to drain ended up engulfing him in many respects. Now, things could obviously be a lot different if he gets reelected, because he's got a better lay of the land. But DeSantis, that guy, he knows how things work. He went down there in Florida, and he proved that he knows how to get things done. And here today, he's sitting here saying he would fire Fauci. There again, that's Trump's Achilles heel. DeSantis just scored big points there. Trump is vulnerable on that front. No question about it. Central bank digital currencies. He says, no way. If he's president, it goes into the trash heap. Scored big points. Just peeled off more support from the populist base that Trump has with the MAGA movement. He's just so well-spoken and laser focused on some of these key issues that just allowed him to score big political points at that conference. Don't underestimate what just happened there. Trump's nowhere to be seen because he didn't show up. There's no rebuttal now. So yeah, he has a 20 to 30 point lead over DeSantis coming into this thing, but now Trump's not there. I'm telling you, DeSantis just scored, and there's a lot of ground to cover between now and the day when the nominee is actually selected. No troops, no American troops on the ground, he says, in Ukraine. And then he points out as well that, the current administration can't even account for the weapons and the money that have been sent to Ukraine already. And then also firing on all cylinders, laser focused again on that issue of LGBTQ plus gender ideology being taught in the schools, neoliberal wokeism in Florida. Florida is the place where woke goes to die. He nailed it, man. He nailed it. And he anticipated what Tucker Carlson was going to ask him. He had answers for everything. Nothing got him off guard. He just went into it and was smooth, focused, came back with very good answers. I think his performance there, honestly, was flawless. He knew exactly what to say and who to appeal to. Can you trust him? He's a politician. You can probably trust him a lot more than most politicians because he went down there, became governor, and did what he said he was going to do. I find conservative politicians tend to do that more often than a lot of liberals, Democrats, But yeah, he's done what he said he was going to do in Florida. Didn't shy away from it. And on that issue of censorship, which certainly played a major role during the pandemic, and now has become an issue that has taken hold and just won't go away. He's established a clear directive there as well. He's going to take a shot at that and address censorship issues and social media problems. Again, that is something that Trump complained about and complained about and complained about and never did anything about it while he had the opportunity, only to then be banned himself, kicked right off social media. Now we're seeing that they're slowly allowing him to come back just in time for the next election. But isn't it kind of weird that for a guy who was hammered on so hard by the mainstream media and with censorship looming as a huge threat, not just to the democracy of the United States, but also to people's fundamental rights, to free speech, freedom of expression, that Trump ultimately really did nothing to address the issue as president? And I'm not sure I entirely agree with DeSantis and his views on China, where he is saying that it's really China that is the big threat to the United States. I would say that China is certainly a competitor. And I would say China, like any other nation state, is a threat to the United States in the way that any other country would be. But and I do see how China does get involved, not only in the United States, but also in Canada in a variety of ways through these Confucius Institutes, through land purchases, investments, acquisitions of, corporate assets in order to exert influence, both politically, culturally, economically, within the United States, within Canada. And so DeSantis, again, taking aim at a direct issue, establishing a specific goal, and taking action to achieve that goal, which in this case was to limit Chinese influence and acquisition of real estate. That's already being done in Florida. So he doesn't just talk, he acts. Very impressive performance. I got to tell you, I was super impressed with that. He actually scored a lot of points with me personally, gained a lot of ground with me. I've been kind of wishy-washy on him, especially since that campaign launch on Twitter, where I just thought, if you can't get that together, how do you expect to run the country? It was out of character for him, because up until that point, I'd seen him as being a very competent leader, a competent administrator, able to organize and delegate and implement plans and identify exactly what has to be done through a system in order to achieve specific goals. Very efficient leader until that Twitter thing. So I'm at this point, after that performance, now in a position to sit here and say, you know what, maybe I need to give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt on what happened with his campaign launch. It probably wasn't him. It was probably people at Twitter who were screwing up in the control room and couldn't get the audio right. And as you may recall, there was delayed audio and audio over audio, and somebody kept playing the intro for the program over and over again while he was talking. And it was just a gigantic production mess. And Twitter was blaming it on, too many people, overloaded servers. In reality, I know a little bit about audio production, having worked in broadcast mediums for my entire career. I can tell you that was people screwing up in the control room. So it was, as I say, out of character for Ron DeSantis, but he was back in the saddle tonight with Tucker Carlson. He performed very well, and I'll let you assess how well he has done here versus these other candidates that we will bring to you after we come back from this message.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, so up next, let's take a look at Tim Scott. What can I tell you about Tim Scott? Well, I don't have to tell you a lot because he's going to speak for himself here in just a moment. So, yeah, he is. I think he's trying to sell kind of a sunnier vision of the future than some of these other candidates, and very faith oriented. So he's right at home at this family focused presidential forum, the first for Republican candidates. Let's go straight to Tim Scott now. Here we go. Hang on just a second. Okay, here we go.
Absolutely. Good.
Thank you for doing this.
Yes, sir.
So we spoke backstage and you said that you have slept in your own bed 6 nights in the last month,
Not much. Yes.
but that it doesn't bother you at all. And
Well,
you're having
not
a great
much,
time.
Yeah, I said behind the scene here that what a blessing to live in a country where we are free to praise the Lord.
Amen.
And that the Judeo-Christian foundation of this nation sets the standard across the world. That is what we talk about when we think about John 8:31 and John 8:32. John 8:31 says, you have to abide in me, and then you will know the truth, and that truth will set you free.
Amen. So, a nation that great has to beware of threats to its very existence.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, Biden mobilized reserves. What do you think of that? And are you concerned that we're moving, as we seem to be, toward war with Russia?
Yeah, so I would say that without any question, we should never allow American soldiers to be engulfed into the challenge between Ukraine and Russia. Our boots on the ground should not be there. The ability My mama wanted to preach, so I'm going to stand up and do it the Southern way.
Preach!
Hallelujah! So, literally, I think one of the failures of President Biden has been his inability to articulate America's national vital interest in the conflict or the genocide in Ukraine. America's national vital interest is degrading the Russian military. When we degrade the Russian military, we make sure that our home front is safer and that our NATO ally partners that would cause us to send soldiers over is safe. When we have the land contiguous with Ukraine safe, we keep our American soldiers at home, and our primary objective should only be to engage when America's vital national interests are being engaged in. Unfortunately, President Biden has no ability to understand and appreciate what that looks like.
Wait, may I ask? So you're saying that it's in our national interest, vital national interest, to degrade the Russian military. In other words, to fight Russia with other people's soldiers.
I would say it this way: if you think about the world order that we established after World War II, you think about a rules-based system. Where does a rules-based system come from? It comes from this nation, our Judeo-Christian foundation, that says that there are rules of the road, that there is something called absolute truth. And we established that. As a part of that absolute truth, what we're trying to do is make sure that our home front remains safe. Keeping our home front safe means that evaluating the actual threats to our country, the most immediate military threat that could happen is Russia. Why is a good question. You look at their 6th generation jets, you look at their hypersonic weapons, you look at their nuclear arsenal. Everything that we do that degrades the Russian military is good for America. You look at the long-term threat to our nation, it's China. Their existential threat that we face long-term becomes China. You look at this rising axis of evil that we're seeing being formed, it's Russia, China, and Iran. Breaking that to pieces before it gets started, I think, is in our vital interest.
So on the day last February that Russia invaded eastern Ukraine, Russia and China were not allied, but within weeks of the sanctions that we applied and the stated intent of the Biden administration to effectively wage war with Russia, you saw an alignment which now hardened between Russia and China. The United States military cannot, as you know, since you oversee it as a member of the Senate, cannot actually defeat Russia and China united. And so it would seem that the Biden policies have created a larger threat, no?
Well, I would say it by looking back to 2014. There are 2 times that we've seen incursions in Ukraine that creates peril for America. The first time was under President Obama when he drew that red line in Syria and nothing happened, which gave permission to Putin to come in and take Crimea. The second time we saw was when President Biden sat back and watched as Scholz in Germany led the Western alliance to provide resources to Ukraine, which was a mistake colossal on our part. So what you saw was President Biden saying to Putin, I'm going to give you a list of areas that we don't want you to have cyber attacks. Weakness. Second that we saw, President Biden said, gosh, you know what? If you just take parts of it, it's okay. Well, when we have NATO territory that's contiguous, bombs, missiles on NATO territory creates a real challenge for our nation.
Well, you can see how it could become, the Third World War very quickly. So why not force a peace?
How would you do that?
Well, you could tell Ukraine, and they are a client state of the United States, without American backing, there's kind of no Ukraine. We're literally paying the salaries of their bureaucrats. We want you to sit down, as they tried to do, but were stopped by our government, and stop this war. Yeah. And reach a peace as one does, where both sides, concede some of their interests. Like, why wouldn't that be in our interest to do that?
I think the faster we get to peace, the better off we are. What we don't want to do, from my perspective, is allow ourselves to ask for a premature peace that cannot be achieved as the alliances continue to come together. To the extent that we can find our path out of this situation, the better off we are.
So what's the point at which we'll know that we've achieved our goal? And I say that within the context of having watched 20 years of occupation in Afghanistan, where nobody could answer the question, what's the point?
Yes.
And no one in Congress ever asked that question, amazingly. So what is the specific goal here?
Yeah, so I would say that the objective should be for Zelensky and Ukraine to be able to achieve victory by maintaining as much of their territory as they possibly can, and then seeing the resources that we've deployed, along with our Western alliances, achieving the peace that I believe comes when you get these two folks to sit down and have a conversation that allows them to determine where those lines will be drawn for the next 100 years.
Okay. Where are you on the matter of sending cluster bombs to the Ukrainian military?
Well, if I was president of the United States, we wouldn't have to. Here's what you saw.
But now that we have, what do you think of it?
I mean, I think they're there. So here's what I would suggest is
Well, they're not. I don't think they're there yet.
Well,
Do you think that we should send them?
I think that the mistake is when you have President Biden saying to the world that here are a host of weapons that we no longer have the ammunition to supply. You have a request coming from Ukraine saying we need more of the weapons that you say you don't have to provide, as opposed to keeping top secret information in your closet. You go to the front pages of every news station, you go to the screens, and President Biden says to the world, we don't have the ammunition. And so what you see from Ukraine is they say, send the cluster bombs over. Under my administration, we would have the resources and a defense industrial complex that provides the weapons that we need and our Western allies need. We wouldn't be in this position at all.
Do you think he should send them?
I wouldn't have to. He already has agreed to do so.
Huh. Let me ask you a sort of non-Ukraine question. So I was just in Eastern Europe, much poorer than the United States. But one thing you notice in the cities I have visited there is that there aren't a lot of, really any, drug addicts living on the streets, ODing on the streets. The so-called homeless problem, which is a huge feature of life in this country, doesn't kind of exist or seem to exist there. What do you think of the fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of people living on the streets and dying there? What should we do about it specifically?
In America?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis as a nation.
Yeah.
You think about the fact that there are several pieces of the puzzle that come together that we have not yet addressed. You look back into the 1980s and early 90s, we had 600,000 additional hospital beds for mental health issues that we have today. So part of the crisis that we see manifesting in three major areas is a mental health crisis that we could help solve if we address the actual mental health crisis that underlies those issues. The first one is the fact that over 100,000 Americans have lost their lives to overdoses in the last 12 months. 70,000 Americans have lost their lives because of fentanyl. We could stop fentanyl from crossing over our southern border by closing our southern border, building a wall. For under, this nation spends $7 trillion. It would take $10 billion to finish the wall, and for an additional $5 billion, we could use the available technology to surveil our southern border and our ports of entry to slow down fentanyl from coming into our country. This is a part of that mental health epidemic that we face. Second thing I'd say is that we always hear people talk about gun violence in this nation. No one actually takes a step back from the conversation about gun violence and asks yourself, what does it appear to be? 55% or so, over 50% of gun-related deaths are suicides. No one ever says that. That is a mental health crisis. And you add those two together and couple it with the reality that because of COVID, we locked our kids out of schools because the left is so committed to the teachers' unions that they did the wrong thing for our kids. And what did we see as a result? A 30% plus increase of our youngsters going to the ER for mental health challenges. We need to get back to some honest bedrock truth that sets captives free. And the way that we do that is by focusing our attention on these three major issues that we need to address as a nation.
May I ask you, and thank you for saying that about the 100,000 Americans, mostly young people, mostly not in the cities, dying every year. That's hundreds of thousands just in the last several years. Why? And you said we should build the wall that was started and then dismantled. Why not build a human wall with, say, the reservists who were called up to go defend Ukraine? Why wouldn't they be defending our border?
Totally agree with you. Yeah. Well,
but there's no effort. I mean, the Pentagon has said, the last president kind of suggested that, didn't do anything about it, but he suggested it. And I think most people thought, well, that's not a crazy idea. And the Pentagon said, like, no, we're not going to do that, as if it's their call. Why would you fund the Pentagon if they are refusing to defend the United States?
Well, here's what I've already done in my legislation. I created legislation that says, now, let me just do a survey of the audience. How many of y'all think we need 87,000 new IRS agents in America? I can't hear you. Say it one more time. I think y'all said no. I agree. Why not take the Inflation Reduction Act that actually increases inflation and the 87,000 new IRS agents that are funded by the $82 billion in additional funding for the IRS, which the $82 billion, about $40 billion is the target, people making under $200,000 in income? Why not take those 87,000 positions and put those folks on the border? Why not increase the pay of our border and patrol agents? Why not give them the resources they need to surveil our borders and do the jobs that they desperately want to do? As President of the United States, I would sign my legislation and divert the resources from the IRS to the border so that we could secure our border.
You're going to audit all those people coming in?
They said he was witty. I see it with my own eyes right now.
I'm for it, by the way.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
Let's take a look at your taxes.
Well, here, listen. I mean,
no, but
yes.
you would. Bottom line,
I would
put
take
armed Americans, federal employees.
The resources. I would hire more. I would not take the IRS agent.
No, I know. I'm just totally joking.
And run them to the border. No, that's not exactly what I mean. What I mean is that take the billions of dollars and put them where America's security needs are first, which starts with our southern border. And by putting that $40 billion of resources on our southern borders, we could close the door. If you don't control your own back door, it's not your country.
Well, aren't you kind of being invaded at a certain point if you've got millions of military-age men coming into your country and hundreds of thousands of Americans are dying? Why is that not the job of the military to stop?
Listen, I don't disagree with you. One of the things I've said is that I would use every resource we have, to include the United States military, to stop the flow of fentanyl and to make sure that the Mexican cartels cease to exist.
Right.
I have legislation that does, I'll wait for that clap. I heard 2 people. I'm looking for 3. Can I get 4 in the house of God? Yes, this is great. Why not use the resources of our country to do what is the primary responsibility of the federal government, which is national security?
Amen.
That's the job.
So what do you do? I mean, I can't imagine many people would disagree with that. I wonder what you do with the millions of foreign nationals here illegally, many with fake papers, who are here. Like, what do you do with them? You become president.
Yes.
Sworn in January 2025, and you've got, let's say, 7 million people who've come in the last 4 years. What do you do with them? Do you deport them?
I think it's a very difficult task to deport them all at one time. But here's what we make sure they never do, is you never break the law and become an American citizen by breaking the laws.
Well, hold on. Would you deport any of them? How many would you deport?
I think you have to start the process of identifying where they are. Listen, this is a really important question. I hope that we don't miss this. Because those folks who come into our country illegally, even those who are seeking asylum, go around our country, and some of the asylum dates for your court appearance is 2033, 10 years from now. So finding those who've come to our country illegally has to be a part of the job number one. And that means that we're going to have to take a look panoramically across our country and make sure that we stop this thing called sanctuary cities and sanctuary states that receive our resources to make sure that the federal government cannot figure out where the folks are. So in order for us to achieve the goals that the really brilliant guy on the stage, I'm not talking about myself, wants us to achieve. That was a compliment, by the way.
Oh, sorry, I went right over my head. I was like, ugh.
Want to make sure I got it. Sometimes I give compliments. I have to let people
Brilliant's
know
a little strong.
Okay. Really smart cookie over here. Achieve. We have to identify where they are, and I'm not going to pretend that will be an easy task, but that should be the responsibility.
Well, but wait a second. The federal government's like knows where everyone is because everyone has a smartphone and they're tracking you.
Yes.
You know, so like we know anyone using a fake social security number. Why not just like drop them off in Tijuana? Bye bye.
Well, I'm going to appoint Tucker Carlson as my bye-bye ambassador to figure this out. So we're going to work together on this. And
a sincere question. Like maybe the reason that people come by the millions, uninvited, illegally, making a mockery of the rule of law. I have to obey the law, but someone from Haiti doesn't? Or what? But they come because they know that no politician will say, come and you're leaving. Like they don't put up with this in Japan.
Absolutely. Well, they don't put up
with
it.
Why not do that?
Here's the fact. I would recommend that we do that. The question isn't that doing that. It's finding the 7 million that's already here and getting rid of them was the first question. But the second question is a better question because if you look at the laws of Mexico, they have the same laws. They're stringent laws. The second time you're caught in the country, I believe the offense is 10 years in prison.
Oh, of course.
And so
it's a real country.
We enforce the laws of our country, and if we did so, we would not have the problem. What we have today is a president who does not mind our border being insecure, unsafe, and wide open. If I was president, we would shut that down, and we would stop folks. We would put back in place the asylum policy that requires you to receive or to request asylum on countries that are contiguous with you, which doesn't include America. And we would also reinstate the stay in Mexico policy. So we would find a better path forward by just finishing the wall, reinstating policies that work, and stop that flow.
Well, so here's, I'm just interested because all measures are relative. So Russia's bad, Russia's a threat, Putin's evil, got it. But the total body count from Russia in the United States is right around zero. Like I don't know anyone who's been killed by Russia. I know people personally who've been killed by Mexico. The government of Mexico allows fentanyl to be made in its country and to come over our border.
Yes.
And remittances from Mexico are a huge part of their economy. The Mexican government is party to the murder of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So why is Mexico less of a threat than Russia?
Well, two things. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay, but
frankly, here's
no Americans killed by Russia, hundreds of thousands killed by Mexico, but Mexico's our ally and Russia's our enemy. How does that work?
Well, I'm not going to pretend like the legislation I have sponsored and I would sign as president of the United States freezes the assets of the Mexican cartels, targets the Mexican cartels, and hopefully eliminates the flow of fentanyl. Because I do agree with you that 70,000 Americans losing their lives on an annual basis is an existential threat to America that we can solve. We don't have to choose. The good news is,
would you be willing to say to the Mexican government, your economy runs on factories right over the border, car plants, for example, but many other manufacturing plants, and we're just going to slap tariffs on that and tank your economy, like tomorrow, unless you stop allowing poison to come into our country. Like, why not do that?
I say you use every tool available to stop fentanyl from coming across our border. No exceptions.
Interesting. So I Googled you this morning. And
I did that last night with you.
Don't ever do that.
I was like, wow, there's a whole lot to read here.
Oh yeah. The pictures are fake AI. But I mean, there must have been 10 stories this morning about Tim Scott, shooting to the top and all super complimentary, and all these big Republican donors like Tim Scott's amazing. And a lot of support from some of the big money centers in the Republican Party. So congrats. I mean, every candidate wants that. But it got me thinking, and I'll ask all the candidates this, but what are the big issues on which you disagree with your donors?
Yeah. So good news is I'm glad to hear they're all flocking to me. I wish they would go ahead and write the check too, because we haven't seen that yet. I will simply say that the issues that I strongly support is I believe America can do for anyone what she has done for me. We are living in a time. Thank you, ma'am. We are living in a time when there is this pervasive force, radical left, parts of corporate America, that continues to force this culture of grievance on the American people. And along with the culture of grievance comes this drug of victimhood, the narcotic of despair. That folks actually have figured out that you can make a profit off of conflict. I want to stand in the gap and say the truth of my life disproves the lies of the radical forces that believe that we should be in constant conflict with each other. America needs positive, powerful, biblically sound leadership to regain the high ground. It's one of the reasons why when I became a Christian September 22nd of 1983, I started reading the gospel and understood that I'm a part of a bigger family, that a guy who grew up in a single parent household, mired in poverty, who wanted to know, who am I according to my Father? I found in Galatians 3:28 that I'm actually adopted, a joint heir in the family of God. And as part of that family, all things are possible. And there are forces in this nation that hates objective truth. Here's an objective truth: 2 genders, 1 truth. You see, here's where we have to get to. We have to get to a place where we are willing to understand and appreciate the strong foundation on which we stand. And whomever doesn't like that, count me as a force for the good of this nation. Count me as a guy who believes that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or imagine. And if you write a check and you don't like that, you can have your money back. Because I don't stand for donors. I don't stand for folks who contribute. I stand because there is a man who walked on this earth for 33 years, who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. And if I'm going to do my job is, according to Matthew 25:21, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's the job I have. That's the place I look for my support. If you play for an audience of 1, it doesn't matter who makes the contributions. And frankly, I don't know those donors that you're talking about who are flocking to my campaign. I'm looking forward to them coming. I really am. I look forward to it. I've heard the stories myself, but what I haven't seen is the millions and millions that you're talking about. But I will accept your check too, by the way. So thank you very much, Tucker, for wanting to be a contributor.
So I'll just end it with this. First of all, speaking for myself, I love what you just said, and I agree with it. Amen. It's just that a lot of Republican primary voters have gotten kind of cynical because the Republican Party doesn't care what they think, obviously. Yeah. And you just look at the polling, what Republican primary voters think, what is the Republican Congress doing? Like, there's no overlap between the two at all. Okay. So it over time, people get a little bit cynical and they think, but you're in it, so you would know that maybe donors are kind of driving the agenda and not voters. Yeah. Well, and I've lived in DC my whole life, and that's totally true. And you know it too. So are there cases, can you just name one, where the donors have come to you and said, I really like you, but this is the issue I really care about, where you said, I actually just disagree with you?
Well, let me give you an example where I am already consistently on the record. One of the areas, I'm the leading Republican on the banking committee. I think when banks go belly up and leave the bag for the American taxpayer, we should claw back the money from those bank executives. I led that legislation to get that done, number one. Number two,
donors don't like that. So
they don't like that at all, no question about that. But we should not be concerned about the donors. We should be thinking about a responsibility. My responsibility is to the bosses that I serve. And when you're a United States Senator from the state of South Carolina, the primary boss I have are only South Carolinians. Whether you vote for me or not, I work for the people. As President of the United States, I will work for the people. Let me tell you what I'm running on, and this is really simple. If you take out a loan, you pay it back. Number one. Number two, my mother worked 16 hours a day as a nurse's aide. She'd come home after changing bedpans and rolling patients, and she taught me one very valuable lesson. There is dignity in all work. Therefore, if you're able-bodied, you work. That's called America. Number 3, if you commit a violent crime, you go to jail, period. Number 4, men should compete in sports against men. And number 5, our southern border is the major national security issue our nation faces. Closing our southern border because of the national security risk that it poses is absolutely in America's best interest, period. And for those who don't like common sense conservative principles driven by the Judeo-Christian Foundation, choose another candidate. It's that simple.
Senator Tim Scott, ladies and gentlemen, South Carolina. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Okay, so let's take a look at that. So I think he in the end finished up pretty good. In the beginning, he was a little shaky. I'm not sure how his position on Ukraine will resonate with the conservatives within the conservative movement. I don't think there's that much support for the conflict in Ukraine, and I don't think there's that much support within the Republican Party right now, especially the populist wing, for confrontation or even a confrontational platform as it relates to Russia. I don't think anybody on this side of the political spectrum really wants to go to war with Russia directly or irritate them any more than they're already irritated. But there's Tim Scott on stage saying that he is in favor of policy that would degrade Russian military capacity, which is essentially what we're getting with the Biden administration right now, where they went into this thing with these claims that they were and continue to defend democracy, but then admitting midstream that what the real objective is to degrade the Russian military, to wear down Russia over time. And they've been, as I've said many times, they've been throwing all their old military hardware at this, having that stuff blown up, and they'll use that as justification for investing in the production of new, more advanced, modern hardware, saddling Ukraine with the debt and taxpayers with the debt of selling off, the debt that comes with selling off all that old hardware. But anyway, there's Tim Scott, Senator Tim Scott, saying that he also believes in this new, well, it's not so new, but the current commitment from NATO to a rules-based international order, or as he referred to it, a rules-based system. What he refers to as absolute truth, but I think he's very, very mixed up, because the rules-based international order really just a bunch of bureaucrats, dictators, officials from various countries, leaders, I put that in quotations, sitting around who've made up their own set of rules that they're trying to impose on other countries, which is actually an assault on the sovereignty of other nation states. unless those other nation states cooperatively agree to adhere to those rules. But an absolute truth comes from a higher place, and that is not what the NATO, UN, globalist, WEF, World Health Organization, rules based international order consists of. It's actually, in every respect, quite the opposite. It's not about ensuring or enshrining the sovereignty and therefore the rights of any nation state through the power or the word of the Almighty God or some higher power. It puts all of the power into the hands of a few people who are not even honestly directly elected, because they represent this collective of countries, NATO. But those people in charge are not actually an elected body, not by the people. Each country has its own elected government, but then these people are actually unelected. And then they usurp the sovereignty of these other nation states. And that's largely what this conflict in Ukraine is about, too. It's in large part about sovereignty, the preserving the sovereignty of Russia. That's the way Russia sees this. That's why they see NATO, even having Ukraine as a de facto NATO nation state, not an actual NATO nation state, but even having the United States in there as an influence. That's why they see it as an existential threat, an actual threat to the existence of Russia. Tim Scott standing up, walking around on that stage, it didn't feel right. It felt very staged to me. It felt like it didn't come off terribly, but no, there was a lot of performing going on there that I thought felt a little bit forced, a little bit stiff, not natural. And because he did that, he sort of walked forward and left Tucker Carlson behind, started to ignore him. It felt almost, and I hate to use the word, but it felt a little disrespectful. I think it was inadvertent, but nevertheless, that was the feeling that it gave me. Perhaps you had a different take on it, but I didn't think it was working that well. He was trying to speak to the audience rather than just engage with Tucker Carlson. But I think you could have done that. He could have done that more effectively simply by just turning and looking at the audience and not turning his back on Tucker Carlson. I don't think it played well. And then Carlson was sitting in the background making kind of grimacing faces at times, thinking, but it almost at times looked like Carlson just wanted to tell the guy to take a hike and maybe, as Leo said, STFU. So I don't think that Tim Scott really did that well. He tried to touch on those key issues, gender ideology and things like that, but not nearly as effective as what we saw from Ron DeSantis. And I don't think he gained any appreciable ground there in that performance. And while there may be some mainstream media reports hyping Tim Scott right now, I don't think he stands a chance. He's just an also-ran. In fact, the truth of the matter is, for the most part, you could go walk around out on the street and ask people who's running against Donald Trump. And I would say probably 9 out of 10 people would have a hard time getting past Trump himself, or maybe 8 out of 10. And then, a few others would probably identify DeSantis and then maybe get confused and say it's RFK Jr. when, he's actually running on the Democrat ticket. So we'll see. I think most people are not paying enough attention to this thing to even know who some of these other candidates are. But it's still very important to pay attention to what's being said here, because whoever ends up getting the nomination, they'll be looking at who is running against them, and there will be deals made along the road, along the path to the presidency, to the nomination, where, you're going to be looking at potential running mate here. You're looking at people who might become part of the administration of whomever it is that ends up getting the nomination. And then if they're elected president, they would look at the talent that's, coming across the stage here during this forum to decide who might they put to work in their administration. So that's largely too what goes on during these sessions. Is some of these guys, they know they don't really stand a chance of winning, but they're positioning themselves for a potential position within it in an administration and for future runs in other elections at the nomination down the road. So there's a lot of strategy playing out here, and that's why it's actually important to still pay attention and listen to what these guys have to say. Plus, they have a lot of sway and influence, even if they don't get the nomination. They do have each and every one of these people have some influence and power within the system itself. And I really strongly disagree with his position on Russia and the conflict in Ukraine. And I think Carlson was absolutely right to call him out on this and say, hey, what about Mexico? Why is Mexico our ally and Russia our enemy? And he says, well, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I just wasn't buying it. Anyway, we'll be right back right after this.
The New World Order. Government overreach. The Great Reset. Mainstream media lies. Now more than ever, independent voices are needed. Donate now at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. Maverick News. The antivirus program for your mind.
Okay, so let's take a look at what Asa Hutchinson had to say. He ended up sparring with Tucker Carlson, and it did not go well for this guy. I'll tell you, this is not live what we're about to run, but talk about a dumpster fire when DeSantis launched his campaign. This was an absolute train wreck, as far as I'm concerned. This guy, well, let's run it. You'll see what I mean. Here we go.
It's Dave. Thank you so much for doing this. So
Asa Hutchinson.
I wanted to talk to you about your veto of the anti-puberty blocker trans surgery bill in April of 2021. At the time, you said that the bill was extreme and that it would interfere with the treatment of minors seeking to transition from male to female or female to male. Given that I'm not attacking you for it, but I am asking if in the subsequent 2 years you've had rethinking of that. Have you reassessed your view on it since then?
Well, first of all, I want to ask you, how many of you all are parents in this room? I'm a parent as well. And what I believe in is that parents ought to raise their children. I believe that parents ought to be in control. And I also believe in the Constitution. I believe that God created two genders and that there should not be any confusion on your gender. But if there is confusion, then parents ought to be the one that guides the children. That to me is an important fundamental principle. Now, obviously, you could take it too far, and if there would have been a bill that said you should not ever have transgender surgery as a minor, I would sign that in a minute, because no parent should be able to consent to that permanent change. But this bill did go too far. It was unconstitutional. It interfered with parents. And so I sided with parents on that bill in managing the most sensitive issue that a parent can face. And I believe in a limited role of government. And so, if I don't think that California ought to be able to tell parents, you need to have gender affirming care for the children. The government should not do that. And in the same way, let's keep the government out of it unless it's that extreme case, and let's let parents guide the children. I stand with parents.
So, and amen for standing with parents, and I think everyone in the room would agree with that. But the reason I asked the question was not to bring up a sore subject, which I know that it is, but to ask if in the subsequent 2 years, you had said that you drew the line at castration of physical altercation of a child's body because it's permanent. But in the subsequent 2 years, I think we've learned that hormone therapy for prepubescent children is permanent. It changes the bone structure, it changes the brain of the child. A lot of people believe, including me, that it destroys the child's life, but it is permanent. It's not reversible. So given that and the standard you just articulated, do you have different feelings? I mean, this is a permanent change we are making to a child. Why would we allow that if we don't allow surgery?
Well, permanent change is one issue, but also hormonal treatment is a different issue and can be a different issue. And whenever you look at the bill that I vetoed, there was not any grandfather clause in there. Again, I respect legislators that have a different view, but I think independently, I think of the parents, I think of the Constitution, and actually the court, if you read the decision of the federal judge that struck it down as unconstitutional, really sided with parents as well.
But how is it treatment? I guess that's my question. If you have a child who's born a boy, I want to become a girl. He hasn't gone through puberty yet. He's say 10. Is it treatment to prevent him from going through the natural process of adolescence? How is that treatment? It seems not like treatment. It seems like something else.
Well, you have to, Tucker, I hope that we'll be able to talk about some issues. I know that.
Well, this is one of the biggest issues in the country, and I think every person in this room would agree that it is a central issue because these are children who are being altered permanently, and you can defend that alteration, that change, if you like, but there's really no debate about whether or not it's permanent. And so I think it's fair to ask you in a calm, rational, and I very much hope polite way, why you would support that.
Well, I didn't say what I supported, I said what I vetoed. And whenever you look at children and what they're challenged with in life, I think it's important that in the most sensitive issues that parents are able to guide them through that challenge. And so I don't like the schools pushing transgenderism. I don't want the schools, for example, when President Obama issued the order from the Department of Education that you ought to have bathrooms in the schools that the children can choose what their gender is and go to which bathroom they think they are that day. I said that is not consistent with the law. I said that.
But you said that children should be able to choose their gender and their parents should be able to affirm that, and the state has no role in getting involved. So how is that different? You're saying that a child shouldn't be able to choose a bathroom, but he can choose his sex? I don't understand.
Let me finish what I said. Let me finish.
Oh, I hope you will.
You don't mind.
Well, please do.
And the finish is that I told Obama they were wrong. I said it publicly that the school districts can ignore that guidance. And so that's where I think the government should not be pushing an agenda in our schools. And that's what I oppose. And so I want the government to stay out. I want the parents and communities and our faith to guide us through these difficult decisions. And so I'm a parent, and whenever I think it's very important that if a child goes to a teacher and says, I think I'm a boy, but I think I might ought to be a girl, well, the school, and they want to do something about it, the parents ought to know about that. And so like New Jersey is totally wrong in suing the school districts that want to be able to tell parents. These are fundamental principles that parents have to have information. They shouldn't be denied the ability to know what's going on in the school with a child. And then they make the decision. They can go to the doctor if the child is suicidal, if the child is struggling. They discuss hormonal treatment that would delay puberty. I don't think this government should come in and tell the parents, you can't give the child a vaccine, or you must give the child a vaccine, or you cannot give them the treatment that you think is important in discussion.
But I think you're a person of good faith, and I'm not attacking your motives at all. I'm just trying to get to what they are, and I will stop with this. But you have repeatedly described delaying a child's natural progression from childhood to adulthood through adolescence. You've described that as, quote, treatment. And so that raises clearly you've answered the question. You believe it's treatment. You believe, I suppose, that people can change their sex. Because if you don't believe that, you wouldn't call it treatment, would you?
Well, God created two genders, and that's what I have stated. And whenever you look at the decisions on that, no, I don't support that. I wouldn't make that decision in my family about changing genders. And I don't believe that taxpayers' funds should be used for transgender surgery or treatment through Medicaid or Medicare or in our military. I don't believe that should happen because traditionally, whether it's the Hyde Amendment that you prohibit funding of abortion with taxpayers' dollars because it violates the religious commitment of many people, the same principle should apply here. I'm saying one simple fundamental thing, that we have to have a debate as to what is the limited role of government. Let's encourage parents to make decisions. Obviously, they can go too far, and you draw a line, and legislatures have to do that. Yes. But that is the reason Arkansas is one of the first states that had to address this, and we handled it. The law has been suspended because it was unconstitutional. Other states have done a better job in it, have redrafted the laws. I haven't read them all, but they have varying different degrees of changes in it, such as having grandfather clauses where you don't force a parent to take the child out of state whenever they're undergoing treatment.
Well, no one would be forcing the child to go out of state. The parents would make that decision. But one of the powers that government did usurp over the past several years is the right to decide what medicine you take in the form of COVID mandates. How did you feel about that? And how many COVID shots did you take? And how do you feel about it now, in retrospect?
How many COVID shots did you take?
0. But I think it's fair, and I can see that you recoiled when I asked you that question. And I don't think, honestly, you should be asking people about their medical care, but that became a matter of public policy. And I do think that the whole country ought to pause and assess, like, what did we just go through? How do we feel about it now? And so it's a very straightforward question.
Well, I'll give you a straightforward answer on a number of points there. First of all, in Arkansas, we had no governmental mandates. In fact, we passed a law which I signed that prohibited government from mandating the vaccine to be taken by government employees.
Bless you.
And whenever the Biden administration said that even the National Guard had to take the vaccine, I called my adjutant general in and I said, make sure that you broadly interpret every exemption. We don't want to lose National Guard personnel because of their refusal to take a vaccine. And then, of course, Arkansas joined in the litigation challenging that from the Biden administration, because whenever you're looking at the vaccine, it should be individual choice. We shouldn't be firing people from government because they make that individual decision. Yes, I took the vaccine, and I went out and held town hall meetings where we brought in medical testimony and local doctors and talked in the community about it. So I think I made the right decision taking the vaccine for me. But other people can make a different decision.
For sure. But do you think that now, what do you make of the evidence that there were an awful lot of people injured by it? I think, well, that's factually true. And it does seem like there is intense pressure not to mention that. And so if we care about people, we should also care about people who are injured by a drug they were coerced into taking. Why is there no conversation about that?
Well, I think there is conversations about that, but let me talk about the pandemic a little bit more. There were some decisions were not perfect. I had to make the best judgments I could during the pandemic. And as a governor, I made 2 decisions I think were very important. One of them was that whenever you look at the businesses, there was enormous national pressure to say, you're an essential business, you're a non-essential business. Non-essential businesses have to close down. I looked at that and I said, an essential business, and I'm going to keep them open. And the second, and because of that, our economy recovered We didn't shelter in place, which were one of few states that made that decision. The other one was I kept our schools open after that spring where we all went virtual. I said, this is not working, particularly in a rural state. And as a result of keeping our schools open for in-classroom instruction, Arkansas ranked number 2 in the nation for days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic. That was good for the students. It was good for our communities. It was diminished the learning gap. And so we don't handle things perfectly, but we make good judgments. And those were 2 that I think will stand the test of time.
So I want to ask you a question that Senator Scott and that I asked Senator Scott, which is, do you think, and would you as president use the U.S. military to seal our southern border?
Well, it's very important that we use our military to support our protection of the southern border. What I would do in approaching the southern border, and of course I was in charge of border security during the Bush administration.
Yes, I know. Yep.
And as some people might remember, we didn't get it perfect, but it looks perfect compared to what you see today.
For sure.
And so I have a little bit of experience along the border security. I was head of the DEA, and so I had to deal with Mexico in reference to the cartels. And that is probably the number one thing that is important, is to address the cartels, to declare them foreign terrorist organizations that harm Americans, that cause a great deal of human suffering, and are responsible for bringing fentanyl in that's killing our citizens and our young people.
Yes.
And so the southern border, we need to increase our borders resources with our Border Patrol. We need to build the infrastructure, including continuing the wall, but we also need to have technology that supports the protection of our border. We need to reform our asylum laws, and then we have to go after the cartels. A very specific plan as to how to bring security to the southern border. Immigration is important to our country.
Yes.
And we're a land of immigrants, and we want to cherish that. We don't want to lose that. But we also need to make sure that we protect our border from a security standpoint and from a sovereignty standpoint that defines a sovereign nation whenever we can control our borders.
Amen. And I think most people agree with that or say they agree with it. But just to more precise action questions. So we have U.S. military personnel in over 100 bases around the world. The president, as you saw yesterday, mobilized some reserves to support the effort against Russia in Eastern Europe. Why wouldn't you use uniformed? And maybe, I mean, you ran the agency, so you may know the answer, and I'm ignorant. But why wouldn't you just create a human wall of American military personnel and just kind of fix the problem immediately? We afford to do that. We don't want to do that for some reason. What am I missing?
Well, a couple points there. First of all, the military is always an option that might be needed at some point, but I want to be able to fix it without having to.
How about when 7 million people come in? Is that the point?
I would like to be able to do it without using the military for a couple of reasons. First of all, we want to show strength with China and making sure we have a military presence in the Philippines. We want to make sure that we show strength in Europe and that we're able to maintain a military that has a global presence. And so military has a lot of responsibilities. Secondly, the military...
May I ask you to pause? Are those responsibilities more important than protecting our own borders?
I'm going to finish my answer first. The second reason is the military is trained to kill people. And they're not trained in traditional law enforcement responsibilities. So it's a different mission. We utilize the National Guard, but our regular military, I hope we don't have to use in the border, that we can solve the problem without that. Now go ahead.
Okay, but if I describe to you a nation in which 7 million people had moved without permission, most of them military-age males, and bringing with them, they brought poison that killed over 100,000 citizens of the country into which they were moving every single year, you would say this is an invasion. This is not only a challenge to a sovereignty, this is proof that sovereignty doesn't exist. You don't control your country. It's not really your country. And you would say that's an emergency. In fact, you might even say that's worse than what's happening in Ukraine right now from an American perspective. And so what if that doesn't meet the definition of an emergency with which you'd use the US military to respond, then what does? What's happening in the Philippines? I mean, I'm not mocking you, but what is happening in the Philippines is more important than that.
Well, the Philippines is close to Taiwan, and so that sends a signal, of course, that fact that we have our bases there, that if we have the right personnel, the right equipment there, then we send a signal to China, don't touch the freedom of Taiwan. And I think that's important. But in terms of what is important, obviously, whenever you look at the Trump administration, they took steps along the border, but they didn't put the military personnel there. And whenever you look at how we can solve that problem, if we can solve that problem short of it, there could be, there's some candidates that advocate using the military to bomb the labs in Mexico. Well, that is called an invasion, and I'd like to be able to do something short of invading a neighboring friendly country, and there's ways to do it. I've worked as the head of the DEA with President Vicente Fox at the time to dismantle one of the cartels, and we can do it again. We've got to use economic pressure on Mexico in order to be successful in targeting the cartels. This last week was extraordinary. Down in Mexico, you're seeing them use roadway bombs, the cartels, and it wound up killing civilians. Mexico has to wake up to the threat to their country and to their economy and to their citizens from the unleashed power of those cartels. The United States needs to support that and pressure Mexico if they're not going to cooperate.
I'm a little confused by the orientation. So, of course, there is a drug war ongoing in Mexico. It's been going on since you were involved in government. But it's the carnage in the United States that I think most Americans are worried about. So you just described Mexico as a friendly country, and we need to help Mexico get the drug cartels under control because they're killing people in Mexico. But they're also killing hundreds of thousands of people here, and nobody seems to care. We can argue about, what the policy solutions are, but it's the emphasis that I think is very striking to a lot of voters. Like, where's the outrage? 100,000 people die of poison sent through Mexico, and we call them a friendly country? I don't understand.
Well, you haven't been to my town hall meetings, which
no, but I'm offering you a chance.
In which I talk about the fentanyl crisis in our cities. And Tucker, you're absolutely right. Whenever I have a friend that I call up who's in New York City, but he's from Arkansas, and I call him up, talk about a political question, my campaign actually. And I said, what are you doing in New York? And he said, my son, who is a college-age student, went to go watch a baseball game in New York. He goes out in the street, as he should not have done, and he bought a Percocet pill.
Yes.
And the Percocet pill was laced with fentanyl. And he overdosed and he died. And so the dad was there to pick up and recover the body. And so fentanyl is a crisis. It's the number one cause of death between those ages 18 and 49 in America. So it is a crisis. It is serious, and it has to be addressed both with going after the cartels, controlling the border, but it's also about what Governor Kim Reynolds did here in Iowa and had a fentanyl conference, which I attended, in which parents who had been impacted were trying to educate others about the danger of illicit drugs, particularly fentanyl, and how they can be laced with other drugs. That's the kind of education effort we need here. It's about addiction counseling as well. And families struggle with this. I've struggled with this. And so, yes, it is something that I take very, very seriously.
Yes.
I'm passionate about. I'm outraged about.
Amen. When you pray, what do you pray for?
Great question. I heard your interview. It was really great today with Bob Vanderplatz. And I saw that you got to Deuteronomy.
Yeah, I've only gotten there, but I'm pretty psyched for Judges. I'll tell you that.
When you get to James, you asked me what I prayed for. There you Bob. I pray for wisdom. In James, it talks about if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. And that's the old King James Version, I know. And upbraideth not is like a child that's coming to a parent and saying, can I have something? And you fuss at them. God never fusses at us or upbraids us for asking for wisdom. So I pray for two things. One, that I'll be a good steward of God's blessings to me,
Yes.
which are the opportunities in public service. And secondly, that he'll give me wisdom. And there's human wisdom that understands the affairs of man that Daniel and David were so wise in. But then there's also the eternal wisdom, the wisdom that we can see our lives through the lens of eternity and recognize that the votes that I cast, the vetoes that I do, it's not just a matter of accountability in history or with your constituents, but we're accountable as believers in eternity. And so I ask for the wisdom to have an eternal perspective, the biblical worldview that's important to me, that I learned at Bob Jones University, that I learned at the Religious Freedom Conference at the University of Notre Dame, which Francis Schaeffer spoke. And I put that into practice in my life as a young lawyer before I was the youngest U.S. attorney. We started a Christian radio station, first FM radio station in Bentonville, Arkansas, in which we had James Dobson, we had John MacArthur, Chuck Swindoll on there. We believed in that Christian ministry in our community. We started a Christian school before school choice was the movement of the country, because I wanted to make sure my children had those different options. And so that's how I put wisdom to apply in my life personally, but also in the public arena.
That's the best thing to pray for. I appreciate it. Thank you, Governor. Great to see you.
I got to say one more thing.
Yes, please.
All right. I heard you say, Bob, that I can do this. First of all, I want to congratulate Governor Reynolds and the legislature for the heartbeat bill that's going to be signed today. Arkansas has been ranked as the #1 pro-life state in the nation. I'm proud of that. We want to protect the unborn child. But I also wanted to say that all kinds of people here with different backgrounds, you've got different candidates as a favorite. I want to get on the debate stage. I think you want a robust debate. I want the people of Iowa to make the first cut on who's going to be the presidential nominee. And so help us get on the debate stage. My website is asa2024.com. And if everybody in this room gave $1 and then told 10 people to give $1, you'll get me on the debate stage. I'll give Iowa all the credit. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great to see you, Governor. Thank you.
And look who we have with us. One of my favorite people.
Good evening.
Hello. Thank you for
Hi.
coming and providing some backup here.
Yeah, no problem.
So, did you see enough of that to give us an assessment of Asa
Yeah.
Hutchinson?
So I don't know him really, and I'm not great with US politics really, but listening to that, all these guys are men of faith. So that's not going to be enough, right? So he kind of went into that, and I saw some of the comments, some skeptical people in Haleo, some skeptical people in his how genuine he is. I agree. It came across a little fake to me as well. But regardless of that, the war, he just seems like that's the priority, right? Let's give Tucker a lot of credit too for keeping on him and keeping asking those questions. Those are tough questions, and he did not let up. And good for him. I'm really impressed with Tucker through this. But obviously, his priority is the Ukraine war as opposed to defending borders. And I honestly doubt that the Americans want to hear that. I really doubt it. I really doubt that they want to hear that the war in Ukraine is a priority over that US-Mexican border.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's much support there within, at least on the conservative side, the Republican side, and especially with the base right now,
Yeah.
which, Trump controls. So yeah, I think it was a disaster for him. I think he came off confrontational with Tucker. He became defensive. He didn't look good on the vaccine issue. Even though he said that he's about personal choice, it didn't feel like he was committed to it. And then he admitted that he'd had the jab, which I don't think played well. That the whole thing just felt bad in the
Yeah,
end.
and maybe he could have explained, his perspective on that. Like maybe there was a good reason why at the time he did believe in it. Who knows, right? Like I
Mhm.
think a lot of people could probably empathize with that a little, but yeah, the other thing too were the gender issues with children and the hormone therapy and that kind of thing. Even present when Tucker presented the new information of this actually does change kids' bodies for good. It's not reversible. He still called it a treatment. He's saying, parents should decide that they want to treat their children. And I don't think that's going to go over well with the people because we, you wouldn't, nobody in their right mind would approve of giving any kind of dangerous drugs, irreversible drugs or procedures to children in any other circumstance. So why is this one acceptable? I don't think it is with people who vote Republican.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I don't think it plays well. I don't think it played well at all here for him.
Mm-mm.
Uh, I think the whole thing was just a disaster, all from beginning to end. And yeah, and it just he. How many times was it? 2 or 3 times when he said, "I'm going to finish talking."
Yeah.
It was just it just felt confrontational, not friendly. And I don't think it had to be that way. I just don't think he handled it
No.
well.
Well, and I think Tucker handled it well because he
Oh
was like,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
talk about this in a respectful manner. He was really good about that.
yeah.
Really good about that. He's like, I don't want to offend you. I don't want to attack you. Right.
Mhm.
And he still kind of took it offensively. And really, all he had to do was, you know, I don't know. I guess what it comes down to is he either is pandering or he actually believes that children are being treated by taking hormone therapy and taking irreversible treatments, right?
Yeah, you know what it comes down to, I think, for me is he's a politician.
Well,
Yeah, that's what it is.
yeah,
He's like walking, trying
yeah,
to, straddle the fence, walk down the middle, not offend too many people.
yeah,
And in the end, I think he's just alienating more than he knows because he doesn't have any conviction.
right. And I think that people, especially people who are voting Republican, they want to hear um, they want to hear conviction and truth behind what the candidate is saying.
Yeah.
So at least with someone like DeSantis and even Trump, like you're getting that. You're getting their real selves out there. They're being themselves rather than trying to play a game.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Okay, let's take a quick break. We come back, then we're going to hit this thing with Nikki Haley up next, and then we're going to get Liz to give us kind of her thoughts on not only Nikki Haley but all those other dudes that came before too. So don't go away.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, Trusted. Grounded in reality. Maverick News. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Too late. Too late. Too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, and you were very modest earlier when you said you don't really know much about US politics. It's not true. That's why I wanted you here, because you know a lot about politics. And so I highly value your input tonight. And up next, and we have Mike Pence after this too. I forgot about Mike Pence, which is not hard to do these days because I don't think he stands a chance either. But as the former vice president under Trump, he's still worth a listen. And what can I tell you about Nikki Haley? Well, she served in the Trump administration as well and has a lot of experience on foreign policy. She's, how can I put it? I would say Nikki Haley is very hawkish. And so she's also going to have, I think, a hard time, especially with the Trump base. She's not going to penetrate that. She's not going to peel off much support because I don't think the Trump supporters, the MAGA people, are very interested at all in prolonging the conflict in Ukraine. And they certainly don't want an escalated confrontation that would result in a war with Russia. Thoughts before we listen to Nikki Haley?
Oh, I think you hit it on the nail on the head there. And you got to bring something, again, going back to real, you got to bring something real to the table that actually resonates with Americans if you're going to take anything from Trump. And not that it's impossible. I think it's very possible for candidates to pull from the Trump support, but you're going to have to bring what Americans actually care about. And they care about, they don't want war. They don't want war. That's not doing them any good. They want to be able to afford things. They want to be able to put food on their table, and they want the death to come down, right? So it's like just at home stuff. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just pick up my garbage once a week. That's all I ask, really. Just pick up the garbage. Okay. Let's go to
Joe Biden got 81 million votes. And my question is, do you accept that? And second, how do you think he did that?
I mean, all I care about is changing that. Like, we can't afford a President Kamala Harris. I will say that over and over.
Amen.
And we have to do everything we can to make sure that that happens.
But as a mechanical question, it's not a trick question. It's just like the mechanics of it, something you're thinking about since you're running. I don't think anyone would say Joe Biden was a great candidate.
No.
Didn't campaign.
He didn't campaign at all.
He was not a figure who commanded respect among Democrats. They made fun of him. I'm not attacking the guy, but that's true.
Right.
Nobody in Washington said, I want my kid to grow up to be Joe Biden. And yet, at the end, he's got 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama, who, whatever you think of him, was a very talented politician and I think smart. So, like, how did he do that? And what can we learn from that?
Well, what you can learn from it is what we did in South Carolina. I said in South Carolina, if you've got to show picture ID to buy Sudafed, if you've got to show picture ID to get on a plane, you should have to show picture ID to protect the integrity of the election process.
So,
and we have to make sure election integrity is something we don't ever stop. You have to continue over and over. We've had some states who've done some great things and they've put voter ID in place, and that's been great. We still have some other states who haven't done anything, and we need to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to. I mean, we saw during COVID, a lot of secretaries of state changed rules without getting state legislative support. We saw a lot of that happening. We saw a lot of mail-out balloting. We've got to make sure we continue to fight to make sure we have integrity in the election process. Because I saw at the United Nations, when you have your people lose faith in an election system, that's the first crack of a country falling apart. We have to keep fighting for this. We have to make sure we get it done.
Yes. So when I asked about this 81 million votes, you immediately said things I think I agree with about election integrity. So are you suggesting that last election, it sounds like you're saying you don't think it was on the level?
Are you talking about the presidential?
That's correct, the presidential.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all know that there were irregularities in there and that there were some issues that happened. We know that there was mail-out balloting that shouldn't have happened. Do I think that changed the results of the election? No. I mean, I think President Biden ended up winning the election, but I think at the end of the day, it showed we've got a lot of work to do in terms of election integrity.
So you mentioned mail-in ballots. Would you restrict that if you're president?
Yeah, I don't believe in mail-out ballots. I mean, if you do absentee ballots in South Carolina, what we did is we did voter ID. We did absentee ballots, but you had to verify they were who they were. You matched up signatures. We counted them as they came in. So there should be no reason you're getting results 2 weeks out. That should never happen. And you have to make sure that and you have to keep cleaning your rolls so that dead people don't vote. I mean, that's a huge thing that we've got to do. And so I think we should always keep pushing for that.
So electronic voting machines, I think, are the majority.
I don't know why
of
he's
voting in
focusing
America
on
takes
this
place
issue with
electronic
her.
voting
I just,
machines. And I know that there are municipalities that
This is something
haven't
that applies to all
received
of them,
access
but,
to the
you know,
software
it's
that
just-
runs those machines. Why would that be, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy if everybody just did paper ballots and then we were done.
Yeah. Do you think that's, I think most people would agree with that. Do you think that that's something that governors should push for?
I mean, I think that you need to show the people of your state that they can trust the system. I always put a lot of weight in that in South Carolina. I wanted to make sure that every South Carolinian knew that we had fair elections, that we had verified elections, and that we were making sure that there were no dead people voting and no people duplicate voting. And I think every governor should make sure that that doesn't happen in their states. And I think that you also go a step further. Congress should also have oversight of election integrity to make sure if we have to change things. A lot happened during COVID. Learn those lessons and say, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? I think we've got some opportunities there.
It doesn't seem to be happening, though.
No, it doesn't. But what has Congress done for you lately?
Fair. Well, last question on this, I'm just interested, since you've been traveling, obviously you're running all around the country, is this question, the question whether the elections are fair, whether your vote is counted, is this top of mind for Republican voters in your experience?
I think Republican voters want to have faith in their system. And I think there's still a lot of questions out there. I think they're still concerned that those things that happened during that election don't happen again. And that's why I think governors need to step up and make sure that they're doing the things. And some governors have done a great job. You have the best governor in the country, by the way. Kim Reynolds knocks it out of the park all the time. But I do think this is a responsibility that we should have. It's a democracy. And in a democracy, you want to make sure everybody has their vote. But more than that, the people need to trust the government that is doing those elections. And so we have to go and make sure that they have faith in that.
One of the things that we've learned, thank you for saying that. One of the things that we've learned in the almost 3 years since the last election is that various government agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, NSA, were involved in shaping public opinion about the last election. They interfered with our election. And that suggests to a lot of people that maybe those agencies have too much unchecked power. You've worked in government. What do you think?
Well, yes, that's true. You know, when I was governor, I went and replaced the heads of every agency. It's the first thing I did when I came to office. It's the first thing a president should do is you control what you can control. And you start with your agency. So I replaced the heads of every agency. I made sure they were people, some didn't vote for me, but they were people who knew that sector. So if it was veterans, it was someone who knew the challenges of veterans. If it was tourism, it was someone who knew heads and beds, people on golf courses. They knew what they needed to do. And I did that across the board. But the second thing I did is I put people in every agency. I sent in teams into every agency to clean it up, pull down regulations, down old issues, get rid of problem children. So in some cases, we had to tweak agencies. In other cases, we had to gut agencies. If you look at the American people don't trust our intelligence agencies. They don't trust our Department of Justice. So you can't just replace the person at the top. You've got to go through and really look at gutting those agencies and getting out a lot of that senior management and things that happen.
I think it's a really good point.
More than that, you have to understand that every action you take matters. So I'll give you an example. When I was at the United Nations, my very first week, someone got on the phone with the press and told them what I was going to do. None of it was what I was going to do. And so I called my staff and I said, who is this? And get rid of them. You're not going to believe who it was. John Kerry's sister. John Kerry's sister worked at the U.S. mission at the United Nations. And I said, get rid of her. And they said, you can't. She's here for 6 more months. And I said, you take her key pass, you take her computer, and we will pay her to sit at home. But she is not to walk back into this building.
Wow. Well, then
You have to be willing to really do the things to shake it up. The next thing that we have to do is, I know presidents typically meet with their governors once a year. I will meet with my governors once every quarter with the sole goal of get the power that's at the federal government, push it down to the states. That's how you empower people, is pushing it down. And you push it down. That can be education, that can be healthcare, that can be benefits. When I was governor in South Carolina, we had thousands of people on welfare. I went, and instead of them sitting on the couch, I went to our businesses and I said, look, if you will take this person and train them, I will pay this X number of weeks, and then you decide if you want to hire them. We moved 35,000 people from welfare to work. I went into our prison systems, and I wanted to know how they got in, what we did to them when they were there, and what we did when they came out. We went in, we put in computer classes. We taught them financial planning. We gave them faith-based classes if they wanted them. But we put equipment behind the fence and we trained them. Now in South Carolina, when somebody leaves the fence, they've got a job to go to the next day. We have the lowest recidivism rate in the country.
what? I'm wondering, I wasn't going to bring this up, and this is not something that you did, but I just was noticing it, that homelessness in South Carolina has risen dramatically recently, as it has in a lot of places around the country. It's a sign of obvious failure. If your citizens are living on the street and dying of drug disease and no one notices, then it's not working. Why do you think that's happening, and what can government do about it?
Well, first, that's your Bidenomics for you. I mean, let's make sure that people cannot afford things. And I'll tell you the one thing that's more shameful than anything, as a military spouse, 33,000 of our heroes are homeless today. That's shameful. We should never treat our veterans that way. But you look at homelessness otherwise, and America has refused to deal with the cancer that is mental health. 1 in 4 people have a mental health issue. But if treated, they can live a perfectly normal life. The problem is, and you look at our veterans, 1 in 3 suffer from PTSD or thoughts of suicide. But right now, if you look at it, if somebody knows they have an issue, which a lot of our teenagers do and young adults do, they can't find a therapist because we don't have enough. There aren't enough treatment centers. If someone with a mental health issue doesn't get help, they get into an addiction.
Okay, in the interest of time, because I want to get to Pence, we're just gonna pull out of Nikki Haley, blah blah blah.
You found her that interesting too?
Oh yeah, I have to laugh though about that comment about John Kerry's sister. I don't know if you guys know who John Kerry is. He's the climate envoy, the first appointed. So he's like, and he's very woke, and he was the Secretary of State under Obama, Lieutenant Governor, I think, in Massachusetts for a while. But yeah, he's the climate envoy, and he ran for president against Bush. So oh, and so his sister's in there kind of trying to do a, kneecap Nikki Haley from the shadows with a hit piece in the media. That's funny. Anyway, so what do you think of her?
She
And
looks
here's
like.
Leo out.
Can you hear me, Rick?
I can, sir. Yes.
Hi, Liz. How are you today?
Good, how are you?
Great. As for her, who was that speaking? It kind of looked like what's her name? Nancy Pelosi's ass 30 years ago.
That's why we wanted you here tonight, Leo, because
Yeah.
you have colorful descriptions.
Well, after colorful.
That's Nikki
Yes.
Haley. She served with Trump. She has a lot of foreign policy experience.
She's one of the Trump backstabbers. DeSantis so far, okay, out of all these clowns that are up there, okay, Bonnie so far, hands down, very well spoken. I like what he had to say about there's only 2 genders, right?
Yep.
Okay, he's not going to lie to people. I like what he had to say. But I must have been missing something in the last 24 hours when I heard that the National Guard is on the reserves are on. What are they on? They going to war?
Yeah, he's starting to mobilize them, just I think to get them in position in case they're needed, I guess. But it's not getting much play in the mainstream media, but it's happening. It's out there.
Because I never heard it till this show tonight, right?
Yeah.
And I try and stay in tune, but I don't know. Does the sitting president think that if he goes to war, there'll be no election, sort of like the Ukraine's? Because you got another thing coming.
Yeah, I don't know. I keep hearing that kind of talk that there won't be a 2024 election, but I'm not putting much stock in that. I think there will be an election. All this I keep having people send me stuff. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Liz.
Just my impression of Americans is they're not going to be pushed around, and they're going to want an election. So they're going to have to do it. Like, do you really want everybody just in a huge uproar? I don't think so.
82 million people can't be wrong. But I'll tell you one thing. If he thinks he's going to go to war with the American people to Ukraine and thinks there's going to be no election, there's going to be an ejection. If they thought that the January thing that happened, I'm not saying it on YouTube, you guys know where I'm going, okay? It's going to be tenfold, 1,000-fold. It's going to be at the end of Joe Biden, okay? Enough's enough. The people have had it. 82 million people just can't be wrong, right?
Yeah, there will be an election. What's going to happen in Ukraine? I don't know. I've been very worried that for quite a while that this thing will escalate to the point where they will be coming for our sons and daughters, not just in the US, but in Canada as well. I think it will get to that point because I don't think it's going that well. I've heard some numbers coming out of Ukraine suggesting that the population of the country has been reduced as much as 40 to 50%, where it was somewhere around 42 to 43 million, I think, somewhere in that range originally. And they've lost through people, fleeing the country to get away from the violence and the death to the number of troops that have been killed. So the population of the country has been cut, as I say, between 40 and 50%. Already, and the troops have been, devastated. That means that in order to continue fighting, they're going to need personnel, and they can only come from outside the country. They've burned through not only the resources that we've sent to them, the weapons and even the money, but they've ripped through their personnel as well.
I feel
if they did that, would they have to make Ukraine a NATO country? Would they have to make that official or no?
No, they wouldn't have to do
you
that.
don't think that they would do that?
I don't think they can during wartime.
Well, they could, and that's what they were talking about during the summit this week. It was a possibility, but they didn't want to do it because if they do make Ukraine a NATO country, then Article 5 would apply, and it would put intense pressure on all of the member countries to then get involved directly in that conflict and actually go to war with Russia, because then an attack on one is an attack on all. That's why they didn't make Ukraine an official NATO member, because these other NATO countries have decided it's just not worth it. And that should also tell us something. This war is not going as well as they're claiming it is, because if it was a slam dunk, they probably would have said, yeah, come on, let's bring Ukraine in and we'll just finish this thing up.
Yeah.
But they're not confident that they're going to win this.
Well, Rick, I feel that Canada, United States, NATO, okay, their war's inevitable, okay, and I'm a pretty peaceful guy, but there's many people like me that if you think you're going to come and conscript my son to go to battle, you better bring a few body bags, because you're going to be losing a few good men over here, I guarantee it. And at 53, I'll throw my life on the line to defend my son and my nephews and my nieces and everybody else. We're not going to war. If we're going to war, it's going to be war with the government. I guarantee it, and I'm going to stand on that side. And I'll throw my
100%.
right now.
Yeah,
Everything.
I don't think people have the stomach for it, and
No.
even all these woke liberals who have been out there, waving their Ukrainian flags or the flags that are half Canadian, half Ukrainian, or half U.S., half Ukrainian, or a mix of all three, or whatever. When push comes to shove, and they come for their sons and daughters, I bet you their attitude changes right quick, because then they're going to have a real wake up call, aren't they?
Well, hey, they're writing checks that their asses can't cash. Okay.
Yeah.
Period. They
Mm-hmm.
can't cash it. The money's running dry. Okay. War is inevitable. But like I just said, come for my kids and you'll see what's going to go down in my hood. Okay. You'll have the Canadian government's so thin right now. We don't have enough troops to fill a stadium. The ACC couldn't even fill our military. So you're running thin.
Right.
Plain and simple. So, I've been a peaceful guy. CSIS, you're watching, RCMP, you're watching, the OPP, the FBI, the CIA. I don't give a fuck who you are. Come for my kid, and you're going to see what's going to go down.
Well, we're not there yet. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but I hear what you're saying. Nobody wants to lose a son or a daughter in a senseless war that never had to happen to begin with. And they've had several opportunities to put an end to it. We saw the documents produced by Putin that had been signed, initialed anyway, that draft document that could have put an end to this just weeks in, that he showed those African leaders when they went to visit Putin in St. Petersburg. And then Boris Johnson went over there and put the kibosh on it and said, no, we can't have peace. No, there will be no peace, Zelensky. And they rejected the whole thing after they had it all mapped out, ironed out. It was all agreed on. All they had to do was just put the final signatures on, and this whole thing would have been over. But nope, couldn't have that, could we? Couldn't have any peace. There's no profit in that.
I can't
We haven't even heard that word come out of Trudeau's mouth ever. I've never heard peace come out of Trudeau's mouth. Not once.
What I have heard, okay, and it really alarms me, is that the curtain is drawn. Okay, and you got anybody who asks about an election in the Ukraine, they disappear. Journalists, there's a hit list on journalists.
Yeah.
Okay, and nobody's talking about this in their mainstream media. Who listens to mainstream media anyways anymore? I don't. Okay, a lot of people don't. This is where they're getting their media, is from the internet. They're going to come down. They're going to crack down. They're going to shut down the internet. Okay, because this is how they got to move their propaganda and the war machine, the war pigs. Like I just said, come and play down in my hood. You're going to see what's going to happen. You don't have enough troops.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, one more candidate, the man, the former vice president of the United States under Donald Trump, Mike Pence. Let's get into that, because Leo, you mentioned J6, and that's what Tucker Carlson is going to hammer on when we come back.
I love it. I love it, Rick. I like.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
And we went to that break, and it sounded like you had something more you wanted to say there, Leo. I'm sorry you got cut off. Did you want to add something?
No, I was just saying Tucker Carlson's holding everybody's feet to the fire, and that's what a journalist does. And he's doing a great job. I'm really liking this show. I really am.
Yeah, he's on fire.
When he talked to Buddy about the jobs and this and that, his answer was quick. When he asked him, "Did you get the job?" No,
nope.
Simple. Case closed.
Love that.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know if he thought he had a gotcha moment there or not, but no, he didn't get Tucker.
Yeah, he made him look like a clown in the Herschel Walker guy there, whatever his name was. He was a clown, right? hallelujah. This is not church, buddy. This is the politics of the United States of America. I get there's a lot of people with beliefs, but this is not the gospel church, period,
Yeah.
for him.
I don't think Tucker likes Mike Pence much, to be quite honest. And, I think you'll get the vibe as we get into this. Here we go.
Easy. I got on stage. There was no Tucker. So,
Oh, hang on a second here. Hang on just a second. Here we go. Oh, we went back to the beginning. Hang on. That's a mess. Let me grab him. Here we go. Almost there. Here we go. Oh, I had it. Sorry, we just lost the cue.
Oh, no, not the
Here we
cue.
go.
like right here in Iowa, to go further. As SBA Pro-Life America, our goal is to strengthen the pro-life commitments of the entire presidential field. But wait, look no further than Vice President Mike Pence as a candidate who needs no persuading. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 48th Vice President of the United States of America, Mike Pence.
The man every MAGA supporter loves to hate. He let Trump down on J6.
Mr. Vice President, how you doing? Thank you for doing this. Sorry, my mic is on. Woo! Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for coming.
you bet. Thank you, Tucker.
So great.
How about a round of applause for Tucker Carlson for being here and doing this, everybody?
Oh, he's trying to butter him up before Tucker goes
The
to
only
the
I thought I was
throat.
going to get off easy. I got on stage. There was no Tucker. So,
You know there's a recession when one of us doesn't have a job. It's me.
that would actually be two of us, Tucker.
Actually, I'll start there. Are we in a recession?
I think there's a real possibility that's already hit parts of the country.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Joe Biden comes into office, and along with Democrat majorities in the House and Senate, they launched a gusher of spending, $2 trillion in unnecessary spending that initiated the worst inflation in 40 years. They launched a war on energy. They dismantled all of our successful policies at the border, created the worst border crisis in history. And the reason I'm running for president of the United States is because I know we can do better. We can bring this nation back. We can restore the American economy. We can secure our border, and we can stand for the God-given liberties that have always made this country strong and true and great.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you. And we can certainly do better. That's for sure. So I have to ask you, since you were a witness to, and in some unintentionally a participant in one of the most widely covered events in American history, January 6th, what was that? Do you think that was an insurrection?
Well, first, can I just take a moment just to say thank you to the family leader, to Bob Vanderplatz and the whole team here, and to our friends at Blaze TV, including my old friend Glenn Beck. We're standing here on a historic day in Iowa, when in just a few short hours, Governor Kim Reynolds would take to this stage and sign into law historic protections for the unborn. And I think all the members of the family leader here in Iowa prayed and worked and fought to bring us to this day. And it's an honor to be with you all. It really is. Now, as to that day, let me just say, all I know for sure, having lived through it at the Capitol, is that it was a tragic day. I've never used the word insurrection, Tucker, over the last 2 years, but it was a riot that took place at the Capitol that day. I saw firsthand where they'd evacuated us down to the loading dock below the Senate chamber, police officers that, as the day wore on, were streaming through 150 law enforcement officers that were assaulted. Obviously, the tragic loss of life ransacking the Capitol that occurred. But I really do believe that a day of tragedy became a triumph of freedom. And I'll always believe that by God's grace, I did my duty that day under the Constitution of the United States of America and our institutions held.
When you say the tragic loss of life, who are you referring to?
Well, obviously, Ashley Babbitt would come to mind immediately.
What do you think of the fact that she was shot?
Well, I just think it was a tragic moment, without question. But I have to tell you that seeing people assaulting law enforcement officers, smashing windows, breaking into the Capitol building, it infuriated me. And it's very likely that the restraint that was shown by law enforcement officers saved lives that day. But I think it's important that we hold those accountable who perpetrated acts of violence and vandalism in our nation's capital. But I'm still waiting for equal vigor and equal prosecutions to be brought on those that brought hundreds of BLM riots to cities across America.
Amen.
I mean, the truth is, you know, we don't make progress in this country by walking away from the rule of law. We uphold the rule of law and we apply it equally and fairly. And I think that holding those accountable that rioted at the Capitol that day is right and proper. But I also believe that people that engaged in the hundreds of riots over the summer of 2020 literally burned out, you know, family businesses and communities and also cost lives.
Yes.
Must be held to account.
Amen. So we spent, when the BLM riots happened and the riot in front of the White House that injured more law enforcement personnel than January 6th, we spent a lot of time talking about why those rioters were mad. They were mad about systemic racism and the death of George Floyd, et cetera. Why do you think the people who swarmed the Capitol on January 6th were mad? And why haven't we talked about that?
Well, first off, I would tell you that I think the January 6th committee was a partisan committee in the Congress of the United States. And it failed its historic mission of bringing the facts forward.
Yep.
And I know your commitment to bringing all the facts to the American people, Tucker. And I know we're grateful for that. The truth of the matter is, as some members of the staff of the January 6th committee said after it adjourned, they spent all their time focused so much on one individual and on placing blame that they spent very little time focusing on law enforcement failures that happened that day and intelligence failures that happened that day. And I hold to the view that we can never let this happen again. We can never allow the capital of the greatest nation on earth to be subject to a riot for any purpose, for any motivation. And for that reason, we need to understand why law enforcement that day was not better equipped, better prepared, where the intelligence failures were. And I believe that in time we'll have those answers.
Amen. But I wonder, though, again, about motive, since these were, and I'm not excusing any act of violence ever anywhere, including on January 6th. However, they were American citizens. Most of them didn't commit acts of violence, and they were really mad. And they were mad because they thought the election was unfair.
Right.
And I wonder why more time hasn't been spent by either party reassuring Americans that our elections are real, that all votes are counted, that the electronic voting machines, which no one seemed to trust 10 years ago, now are infallible, why mail-in voting is a good thing. Like, why doesn't anybody try to reassure the public that the mechanics of voting are legit? And are they? Do you think the last election was fair?
Well, as I said on January 6th in my communication to the Congress, and I've said many times since, there were irregularities in the 2020 election. There's no question. There were about a half a dozen states that changed the rules of elections in the name of COVID.
Yep.
And that undermined public confidence in the outcome of our elections. Now, at the end of the day, we brought more than 60 lawsuits, states engaged in recounts. And when states ultimately certified and courts upheld those changes in virtually every instance, and ultimately we were able to determine that the changes, there's no evidence that the changes had changed the outcome of the election in any way. I knew that my duty was clear that day. But candidly, as I've said before, President Trump's words that day were reckless. I believe whatever his intentions in that moment, it endangered me and my family and everyone that was at the Capitol that day. I believe history will hold him accountable for that, just as the law will hold everyone that engaged in acts of violence.
But may I just to the rest of us who weren't there, who were just participating or trying to in our democracy, 10 years ago, Democrats said, look, electronic voting machines can never be secure. And of course, that's obviously true. Anything electronic can be subverted. Real countries don't use electronic voting machines. Are you confident that a country with electronic voting machines, ours, can have an election that you're participating in that everyone can trust?
Well, I believe we can, but I welcome the fact that since 2020, Republican-led states around the country have enacted election integrity reforms. I'm somebody that believes that, and Indiana was the first state to do this. I'm somebody that believes that you ought to be required to give a picture ID when you go in to vote. We ought to have voter ID in every state in America. But with regard to voting machines, I would tell you we had them in Indiana, but in Indiana and elsewhere, they produced paper ballots. Recounts were taken in states around the country. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do everything in our power to restore public confidence in the one person, one vote principle at the heart of this republic.
Why not just get rid of electronic voting machines and call it a day, and then we don't have to debate it?
Well, I would certainly be open to that.
Is there a downside?
But what I believe, Tucker, is that states govern elections. States ought to conduct our elections. In fact, our founding fathers debated this at the Constitutional Convention. It was one of the reasons why I believe that my duty was very clear on that day. Despite the fact that my former running mate continues to hold the view that I had the right to overturn the election. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. I had no right to reject or return votes that day. And Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024. But this principle of state control of elections is absolutely vital. We've got to, one of the very first bills that Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Joe Biden brought to the floor of the Congress was a bill to nationalize our elections. It's what essentially brought me off the sidelines. It was the first thing I spoke publicly against after I left my role as Vice President of the United States, because you never want Washington, D.C., or any one person in Washington, D.C. deciding our elections. And the truth is that one of the ways that we govern the integrity of our elections is by letting states like Iowa, like Indiana, every state across the country to be able to conduct our elections. So if states were interested in going to all paper ballots, I would cheer them on. If states were willing to use with strong integrity, continue to use electronic machines, I'll cheer them on.
But no
states should govern elections in America now and always.
I think it seems like it's a constitutional principle. That seems right to me. But in point of fact, no state, including ones with Republican governors, has really done anything about election integrity. They have not restored elections to what they were in, say, 1992, where you have paper ballots, you have voting on the day of the election, and you have voter ID. Like, these are super simple, but no one's done it. Why?
Well, I think there's plenty of opportunity to advance election integrity reforms around the country. As long as we don't intrude on the independence of states to conduct elections and to manage their elections, there are ways the federal government can provide resources and encourage reforms. And if I'm president of the United States, I promise you, we'll fight every day to restore public confidence in elections in this country.
So you've issued thank you for that. You've issued a bunch of public statements about your views on foreign policy, which are definitely within the mainstream of Republican views, as far as I can tell. You recently met with Zelensky, according to news reports. And I'm wondering if during that meeting, as a prominent Christian leader, which you are in addition to your political views, you broached the question of his treatment of Christians within Ukraine. The Zelensky government has raided convents, arrested priests, has effectively banned a denomination, a Christian denomination, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church within Ukraine, has persecuted Christians. And I wonder if you raised that with him.
I did raise the issue when we were there. And I raised it with the leader of the Orthodox Church when I was visiting Kyiv and asked him about concerns about religious liberty. He assured me that the Zelensky government in Ukraine was respecting religious liberty, even while recognizing that there were very small elements of the Russian Orthodox Church that were being utilized for the purpose of advancing the Russian cause in Ukraine, and that they were taking steps to hold them to account. But the leader of the church at St. Michael's in Kyiv told me personally that he believed that the Zelensky government was respecting religious liberty. And I must tell you, other than the sanctity of life, there's no higher priority in my life than preserving the freedom of religion in America and championing religious liberty around the world.
I'm confused. On this question, it's very clear that the Zelensky government has arrested priests for having views they disagree with. That's not consistent with religious liberty. It's an attack on it, and we're funding it. And I'm just wondering how is it, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, but I sincerely wonder how a Christian leader could support the arrest of Christians for having different views.
Well, what I can tell you is I asked the Christian leader in Kiev if that was in fact happening, and he assured me that it was not. People were not being persecuted for their religious beliefs. Now,
he said
let me take a break here. I know we disagree on this strongly, but I respect your right to your opinion on Ukraine, and I trust you'll respect mine. Look, I've been to Ukraine now twice. My wife and I traveled into Ukraine.
Okay, let's pull out of that. I think he's just avoiding the issue. I think that he clearly has just decided to take the answer at face value so that he can conveniently ice skate away from something that is an inconvenient truth. And the reality is the Zelensky regime has been violating personal liberty. They have no respect for religious freedom. They've suspended elections over there. They've been arresting journalists. They have a hit list for political activists, artists, and journalists. Some of those people have actually been killed. And Mike Pence just chooses to put the blinders on because it's convenient. And it's a lot easier for him to do that than have to actually confront a very serious issue that might actually cause the United States to rethink its entire position on the Ukrainian issue. Thoughts?
Lots.
I think you're spot on there, Rick. Like, it's again the fence sitting, right? Like, and again, I really don't think Americans want to see that. I think they want to see them say something with conviction and take a stance. He doesn't have to be, well, I'm against Ukraine now because they violated those religious rights, but he can say, no, that is unacceptable. We don't violate religious rights. And, I will definitely convey that, or, make it a little bit of something up, but just to avoid it altogether. And yeah, that looked like a bunch of BS.
Well, he went to Ukraine. He's not actually
Well, I asked
fence-sitting.
him. He says it's not happening.
Yeah, he says not going on. So it was like, who am I to judge? Or who am I to second guess? And of course, he doesn't want to, because then that forces him to then have to address that. He doesn't want to have to address it. So the answer is very convenient for him. He's being willfully blind.
Yes.
Yeah. I think he's an Arnold Benedict. Okay, he's a traitor. Now, he could sit there and say he don't want he wants electronic ballots or paper ballots, but nobody, like you said, Tucker pointed out, nobody's reforming anything. Okay, yeah. When were the Shads in the Bush election? Remember the one in Florida? Remember the Shad election?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Right. Okay, so there's been election interference and all kinds of shit in the U.S., Canada, all over the world for too long, man. And it don't have to be like that.
Are you talking about when Bush was?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Remember,
yeah.
who was it? Buchanan and Bush? Were they
Yeah,
running?
and they had to have the recount, and it came out in favor of him. But yeah, I remember.
Yeah, the Shads. Okay, they've
Yeah,
tried
the hanging Chads. Yeah,
they've tried many things. Okay, and for Pence to sit there and lie and say about the J5, whatever it was, J6, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sit there and lie blatantly. Well, we all seen the videos.
Yeah.
Okay. And say, oh, the security. It sort of reminds me of last week when they found the bag of cocaine in the White House, but they don't know whose it is. You got more cameras in the goddamn White House than you do anywhere. Okay, you got the security up the yin yang, but they don't know whose cocaine it was. You know, he reminds me.
They found no DNA, no fingerprints,
right?
Nothing that could lead them to anyone.
Right. Pence is so full of shit. He kind of reminds me of Jerry Sandusky. Okay, and he's the remember Jerry Sandusky, the Penn State football coach that was raping all the players for years.
Oh.
Okay, he reminds me of that type of cocky guy, right? The football jock guy. If next time you do this, Rick, let's get the gongs, okay, like the Gong Show, because boom,
get him off.
Yeah, we didn't have to go through all this. We could have just gonged them out. 3 of us, you're gone. See you later. Up next, right? That's what it reminds me of, is the Gong Show, right? But hands down, so far, the only one that spoke decent to me was Florida's governor, DeSantis, right? He is educated. Okay, he answered the questions right. I don't know. Out of all of them, if that's the candidate, he's the guy who's going to win it. Now we got to hear what Trump's got to say, right? I'd like to see him and Trump team up. It would be a blockbuster. It would be a hit. But a lot of people out there saying DeSantis is a traitor too. Trump's the reason he's where he's at today. Well, I'm sure Trump helped him out. But, he's a seasoned politician and he's taking it to the next level. You can't knock the guy.
Well, the thing to remember about these primaries is it's like, they are competing with each other. They're running to, for the prize. So they criticize each other. Just think back to the, other elections and when these races have unfolded before. Just think back to even 2016 when Trump was running against like Ben Carson and he was very critical of Ben Carson. And then after he became president, Ben Carson was his best buddy again, right? So that's just the way this game is played. They'll criticize each other, attack each other. They'll draw blood, but later they'll be friends again.
It's the way of life. It's the way of life, Rick. Okay, I came into work yesterday. I told my boss I'm done. I've had it. I can't take it anymore. It's Maui time, really. And he's like, "Are you serious?" I said, "I'm 100% serious. I'm looking for another job." He said, "Why is that?" I said, "I don't like the direction the company's going, period. And I don't see it being open in 5 years, so I'm bailing." Right? So today they're all having a big meeting. It's not about money. You can't pay me anymore. It's not about the money with me. The more you pay me, the government's going to take it. It's about bettering myself and moving forward, right? I can't blame DeSantis for that. I wouldn't. He's moving forward.
You've got to remember, it's part of it's politics, right? They're politicians. It's politics. I think it's just for a lot of people, they like DeSantis and they like Trump, right? So they got two guys that they really like and they don't want to see them fighting, but they're going to have to fight each other because they both want the same position. So they have to. That's just part of the game. It is, as much as people hate it, that's what politics is. That's what it is. So
it is. What about Pence? Liz, do you think he even stands a chance?
Oh, he makes me want to vomit. I honestly, I think people will see right through that. I don't think personally, I don't think he stands a chance. He won't even, one of the things I noted is he wouldn't even say, let's get rid of the voting machines. Like, he wouldn't say it, right? People want to, they want to hear that. Like, again, saying something with conviction. And it's not like he has to say it and then anything comes of it. Like, he just has to get behind the people. That's what the people want to hear. He just has to get behind the people, but he won't. He's a fence sitter. So, and do you notice all these guys are saying election irregularities? They're all using that same line.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, the other, like, DeSantis is going to pull ahead because he's genuine, right? And same with Trump. They won't use those same bullshit lines that everybody else uses.
It's funny.
They've all practiced it, right?
It's funny you mentioned that word, election irregularities, okay? Because they're not going to come out and say that if there was a fix, okay, that it was rigged. They're going to use that word that you just used, right? And it's funny they're all using it, but nobody's doing anything about it.
Right.
It's
and
sick.
they won't.
As for Pence will be sitting on the fence, hopefully with a pole up his ass when Trump comes back. That's the way I see it for Pence. He's an Arnold Benedict. He stabbed his boss in the back when he needed him the most. He didn't stand for him. And now he's saying, all these things that happened. We've seen the videos. Tucker released the videos.
Yeah.
Videos don't lie, folks. Right?
He's saying they weren't equipped properly with security and that kind of thing. And it's like, well, we watched them open the damn doors.
Exactly. Bingo. Right.
Well, I mean, there was the issue, though, of, Trump had actually asked for more guardsmen there. And Nancy Pelosi said, oh, no, we don't need that.
Yeah.
That in a way was like a setup, too, because it was like, no, don't bring more, crowd control. Let's just let them in. I mean, that's what I'm taking from it. It's like, it was a setup, man, in so many ways. Unfortunately, some people took the bait, and that's where we got into some difficulties, right?
It ended peacefully. They could say what they want to say. You had that many people. It could have got really dark, really fast.
It got way worse. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And and they made crap up. Like the cop that was supposedly bludgeoned to death with the fire extinguisher. None of that was true. Yeah. It's provably not true. And yet that was reported, widely through mainstream media. Absolute fabrication. The guy died of, what was it, a heart attack or a stroke or something later?
I think it was a heart attack, yeah.
Yeah, a heart attack. And, he wasn't bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher. That was just an outright lie.
Yeah, you know what? We've all been lied to. One thing is for certain, we're not being lied to when we're going to be in a war very soon. And I do feel that's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be civil war or Ukraine war, what's going to happen first, but there's going to be war. It's inevitable. The writing's on the wall. I feel it in my bones. And it's sad because I went 52 years of my life. I was a born Vietnam baby, right, 1970, but I never witnessed any of it really. They've been all smaller conflicts, Grenada, the Iraq, Afghanistan, right? They've been self-contained where they didn't need a draft and need people. I don't see any people lining up at the recruiting centers. And it's gonna get nasty before it gets any better. That's for sure. With Mr. Trudeau,
seems to be escalating, and they're just not going to let go. Like, you watch that NATO summit, and you listen to what Biden said in his closing address. It was like, there's just there, and we will not waver. We're gonna. It's just like just trying to rally public support for this lost cause, really, in my view. This is insane. But you can see they're kind of backing off. I think they're trying to buy some time so they can replenish their ammunition and shore up their resources. I think the longer it goes on, the worse it is for Russia. Russia needs to accelerate what they're doing and not give the Western countries time to replenish. That, I think, would be a mistake on Putin's part. He needs to move in, try to end this thing as quickly as possible. I'll throw it back to you guys.
I think Russia is not stupid at all. Okay, they have their own alignment with Iran, North Korea, China, all these rogue states. Okay, and they're just, you drop cluster bombs on Russia and see what happens. NATO, it's game on and game over very fast. They're not going to put up with it. And if the Chinese throw their hat into it, look out, Taiwan's gone. And who knows what else is gone. It'll be like the movie Red Dawn, where everybody's flying over North America, troopers flying out of planes, right? And then all hell's going to break loose, right? Russia's not stupid at all, right? So if the Americans are going to amp it up on with NATO, not only do they hold the gas in the oil reserve for the Baltic states, they're going to freeze them out. It's going to be a humanitarian crisis at its best. Okay, and what do you expect Russia to do?
Well, if this thing escalates and we get involved in a conflict with China, I think we're done. I mean, what are they thinking? We're can't go to
done.
war with China.
No.
Everything we have comes from China. As soon as we go to war with China, we have nothing. I mean, through the pandemic, they couldn't get chips to manufacture cars, for crying out loud, and so many other things. The supply chains got disrupted from that. Can you imagine if we go to war with China and they can't get, like, everything comes from China? Even I can tell you that even all your auto parts today come from China. If you go to the auto parts store to buy, doesn't matter what it is, spark plugs, brake pads, it doesn't matter. It's all from China. So if we go to war with China, we are screwed. We're done in like a week, because the economy will collapse, and then we're done anyway.
I'm in the Great Canadian Superstore the other day buying some groceries, and there was aisles, Rick. I should have took pictures of this. Okay, empty. And my wife says, "What's going on here?" I said, "You know what? There's the West Coast strike, the port strike."
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just a taste. This is just a strike on the West Coast with the ports. If China was to close down commerce, we're fucked, and we're fucked really fast.
Mm-hmm.
You think the shelves are going to be, a few shelves are going to be empty. They're all going to be empty.
And if they don't get us economically, just pure muscle. Like, look at their forces, right? Their armed forces compared to ours. What do we got? Like, we've changed the way that in North America in general, we've changed the way that military train to be more accommodating to, like, gender and whatever, right? Whatever they want to whine about. So you think China trains that way? Hell no. Like, we're done. We're done on so many levels if it goes that way.
Look at the response we had when those Chinese spy balloons are flying over North America. Those things came right into Colorado.
That was pathetic.
Right? So they came right into North America without even being seen by NORAD. That's scary.
That is scary. Yeah, we don't stand a chance. There's no.
This is terrible to have to sit here and talk like this. I mean, I wish we weren't saying these things, but I think it's true.
Grow your gardens, can your food. That's the only suggestion I could give you is, right. I don't want to be an Orson Welles and tell everybody the world's going to end next month, but it sure can.
There's people that have been prepping for years and years. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being prepared. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. But really, like, it comes down to what you were saying earlier, Leo, is like, the people don't want to be involved in these damn wars. It does nothing for the people, and we're definitely not going to give up our children for it.
That's why civil unrest and civil disobedience will be high in North America. And I guarantee you, okay, there's going to be backlash, and it's going to be towards the elite. These cockroaches that think they're running the show, they're not running shit. That's when the not only the Chinese economy, that's when the North American economy will shut down. People will stop going to work. People will stop producing shit, and that will be the end of the U.S. government, the Canadian government, because the people are going to take shit back. And that's the only way you can take it back, unfortunately. I don't want to see that shit, but it's going to happen. It's the only way it can happen, right? So people are going to strike like they are in France, but it's going to be on massive proportions like we've never seen before, and it's going to hurt. And that's the only way you get rid of these cockroaches. There's other ways of getting rid of them too, but I won't say on here, right? People will go to extreme measures.
Yeah.
And they've been known to go to extreme measures, and those extreme measures will be happening as we see everybody's ramping up for something right now. The fight's on. Put them up, put them up.
I just hope that if things do go where you think it is, that Canadians, Americans will stand up for themselves, but I hope Canadians finally stand up for themselves. I just worry that we end up becoming, look at what we did through COVID. Like, we laid down so quickly. I say we as a population, not as us three. Like, I want to see people stand up and say something, say that you don't like this, say that you're done with the war, say that you don't support the war. Like, who supports war? It's crazy. But people just go along with it. They've been going along with the Ukraine war. They're just fine with it, And
Well,
I don't understand that. How can you be okay with a rich guy's war? Like, it makes no sense to me. Look at what Rick was saying about how many people have died over there. That's insane. That's just awful. Like, it's so disgusting. It makes me nauseous when I think about it. And I'm not I don't have a Ukraine flag in my yard, but I don't want to see innocent people die. But innocent people are going to die when people don't just say, "Hey, stop."
Our greatest sacrifices as humans is going to happen in the next 48 months for a lot of people. Okay. It's going to be life or death in dire straits for a lot of people just to survive. Okay. Right now, what are the interest rates? 6%. I think it's 6% now, 5.9 something. Okay.
Well, they raised it to 5,
Mm-hmm.
the base rate, but that means that when you go to the bank, it's much higher than that. Everything just went up. They raised
Right.
it 25 basis points.
Now a car costs you
last
$9
week.
for a vehicle. I'm not buying a car. Even if I had cash, I'm not buying a car. I'll buy a used car, but I'm not buying a new car. But this is going to work all the way up. You're going to have a whole class of people now that can't afford to live in those nice homes that they bought at 2, 3, 4% when they're giving the money away. A lot of people drank the Kool-Aid. Okay, even people on the right side, they said, "Oh, look at the free money." Okay, they took advantage of the free money. I knew damn well nothing's free in this country. I never took 1 cent. I never took that CERB that everybody in my shop, I was the only guy still working. Right? I look around and I'm the only guy working in the shop. Everybody else is collecting this $2,000 a month free money. Well, we found out it's not free. And now they're coming after the businesses that got the $40,000. Remember the free grant money? Now they're coming after businesses. Trudeau's making a lot of enemies now, okay, just by that one, because there's a lot of people on the left that were taking that money, but now you got to pay it back. Nobody rides for free. And I knew that. I could smell it from a mile away. I never took I just kept with the program. My program was forget everybody else, do my own thing, keep working, work my way through it. When you look in Toronto, I think yesterday there was some lady just walking down the street out front of one of these shooting galleries for the safe injection sites that was murdered. And I was watching the video today, and Rebel News actually went up to do the interview, and they're all still wearing diapers on their faces. Okay, these social workers and the on-site, they're all wearing the diapers on their faces, and it's like, you know what? People are still drinking the Kool-Aid by the gallons.
Yeah.
You can only drink so much, you get sick and you die, right? So
a couple of people have commented in the comments about the truckers, the convoy, people standing up, and you guys are right, absolutely. But what I want to point out about that is as soon as it got tough, like we had how many people on overpasses supporting the truckers when they first rolled out, right? As soon as it got tough, as soon as the media and the government started to attack those people, everybody backed off. At least in my community. I don't know about your, like everybody in the chat, I don't know about your communities, but immediately everybody backed off and they stopped talking about it.
My community is the west side of Windsor, and that was the Ambassador Bridge. So
Right.
We didn't back off. Things got pretty hairy down there.
Yeah, but that's you guys. But Leo, what about the rest of the city?
Well, the thing is this: a lot of people don't have the money to go to across the city. Okay, and I seen that happening. I wasn't down there. I was down there for the freedom. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of things I was down there for were the poor, the homelessness, the cost of living, the housing crisis, all kinds of shit. Right, that all folded into this for me. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I was preaching down there because I could smell it. It was too expensive for a lot of people just to get to Ottawa from Windsor. It's only what, 7-hour drive, 8-hour drive. People couldn't get down there, right? There would have been millions of people. So now that they got the economic stranglehold on the people and they cut off the money to everybody, okay, you're going to have nothing. You're going to like it. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's not going to be any more big protests because people can't do it unless they're doing it on foot in their own community, right?
Yeah.
But you're not going to have massive protests like you see in France, not in Ottawa. You're going to have that group that's already in Ottawa that'll always protest in Ottawa. You'll have your group in Chatham, Ontario, your group in Windsor. But as a whole, and you get that the whole group collectively, you'll never see it again. Not like that.
And we have a disadvantage because of our landmass.
Exactly. You know, the funny thing about the convoy, you had people coming from east and west coast, so it's north and south, right? It was pretty bizarre to see, right? And to let it go on that long, 3 weeks, that's a lot of money, man. Okay, for any type of protest like that, you got to have big bank in your back pocket. If you don't have the bank, then you're not having the discussion, right? Unless it's on the computer.
Yeah.
Well, it seems everybody's got convoy on the brain still years later. Let's get some final thoughts on the main topic of tonight, which is these presidential hopefuls. Leo, I'll throw it over to you first, and then we'll get Liz's thoughts to wrap up.
Like I said, next time we do it, we need the gong. Bong, bong, bong. DeSantis was the standout of tonight. Obviously, we're going to get to Trump. He's going to have Trump on there, right, Rick? Eventually.
No, Trump skipped this.
Yeah, but you know Tucker's going to interview Trump.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I've heard about that.
Right,
We'll
and he's going to have RFK. He's going to have them all, right? So there's only 3 real runners out there, and DeSantis is one. You know, Trump's one, and RFK's the other one, right? There's only 3 of them out there that's going to, you know. And DeSantis or RFK's what? A Democrat.
And Biden, I think, Biden is he's going to be difficult to get out of there because the Democrat machine just wants to keep him there because they can control him.
82 million people can't be wrong, Rick.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So 82 million people just can't be wrong. You know what? These slimy bastards, Trudeau's one of them too. Okay, they're all slimy, and there's no way, when you got a sitting prime minister in Canada with 27% of the vote, who's got a majority party calling the shots like he's a majority, and he is, and that's because the NDP. So you know what, everybody out there, our time in Canada is going to come to vote very soon. If you vote Liberal, you're voting for NDP, and if you vote NDP, you're voting for Liberal. So there's only one way. If you want to get rid of the Liberal Party, you're going to have to get rid of 2 parties. That's the NDP and the Liberal Party, and everybody stick to the one vote. That's conservative for me. That's the only logical reason, the only logical party out there for me to vote for at all costs, even if Pierre gets a majority, whatever. On to you, Liz.
Yeah.
So as far as these guys go, I would say it's going to come down to DeSantis and Trump. I would hope that that's where it comes down to. I think we got to give credit where credit is due with Trump. when he was president, there was no war. That was nice, right? Uh, Americans seemed to be happy. They seemed to be doing well. He did a lot of good things. I think he had his time. My own personal opinion is I think DeSantis is, I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. I think he's very professional. He's proved himself in Florida. He's gotten stuff done and very quickly. Look at when they had the disaster with the hurricanes, like how quickly he fixed all of that. You know, who else has moved that fast to fix anything? And everything, he comes across genuine, and he's saying the things I think Americans want. I didn't get to catch his interview tonight, but I've heard him speak before. And he comes right out with conviction, and he's not a fence sitter, and he says it. And Trump isn't a fence sitter either. Trump's style is not, he wasn't a politician when he became president, right? And I still kind of feel like he's not really a politician. Not that I'm a fan of politicians. I've never been a fan of politicians. But when you're doing such a huge job of being the president of the United States of America, you have to know what you're doing. You can't be fly off the seat of your pants and saying, you know, sometimes Trump comes out with these ridiculous things. And I just think that Americans may want Trump to go again, and that might be what's necessary. But for the good of America, I think DeSantis would probably be a better choice in that position. And I guess really too, what it's going to come down to, what people are going to have to think about is who can win the presidency. So they got to pick the candidate who they feel confident will actually win against the Democrats. I guess that's a huge factor too. All the other guys, they're not going to win. They're not going to win. There's no way. There's no way they'll win presidency. So get all them out of there. But when it comes down to those two, I think that's got to be a big factor in the American people's minds, is who's got the ability to win.
Well, I'm looking at some of the comments. Christopher Joseph said, Leo's a West End, and I'll be voting for Brian Massey. Never voted for Brian Massey in my life, and I won't start now. He's on the way out the door, and hopefully he is. And what I get from this, either way, DeSantis or Trump, either one gets in, the war in Ukraine stops that day.
Good point.
That's the key.
Yeah,
so either way, you're in good hands.
Yeah, not really losing. And if it came down to either of those two and RFK, man, would that be a cool election or what?
That would be.
Yeah.
It would be nice to see RFK join forces with Trump. That would be just something to see.
That would be crazy.
You know, that would be bringing both sides together. Okay, the division would end right there, right? So,
yeah,
conquer and divide. Bring them both together. That's all I got to say. With that being said, I got to go to work for a few more days. Then I'm done.
You're really leaving your job?
That's, you know what? I've just had enough, Rick. I'm at that point where either I want to retire or I don't know. I'm 53 years old. You know, I threw it on Facebook, right? And my boss said, "Oh, you can't put that on Facebook." I said, "It's my Facebook." He goes, "Well, you know, so I'm not saying anything bad about the company or you or anything. That's me networking." He said, "Well, I guess." I said, "Well, how do you think I found this place?" On Facebook. I threw it on. The guy said, "Hey, come over to the shop that I was at," right? And I went over there, right? That was almost 7 years ago. Okay, and I said, if it wasn't for Facebook, I wouldn't have found you guys. So you say you got a point there, right? It's not that no bad blood. It's just I don't like the direction it's headed, right? So I'm going to take 2 weeks vacation, and that's the first vacation I've had since 2000, since the vid. Okay, since the bullshit with the vid, I haven't been on vacation. I'm taking 2 weeks off, and I'm going to reevaluate myself on that vacation and see if I'm coming back here or if I'm going to a mine up north. Who knows? But I'm going somewhere.
Well, I don't know what to say except
well,
good
rest
luck
up
and
and
yeah,
figure it
The
out.
only
Good for you.
The only thing that sucks, if I do go somewhere else, I won't be watching the Ricky Walker show like I do here. That's for sure.
Well, then you
Yeah,
can't.
that's right. Yeah.
Then you can't go.
Yes, that's right.
Then I
You're
can't
not
go.
allowed. You have to stay.
Well, let's let the people vote in chat, okay? You guys vote in chat. Do I stay or do I go? Give me a thumbs. Give Rick a thumbs up. How's that sound? Everybody give Rick a thumbs up. I can't believe the people viewing. You got 187 views that I see, and that is police code for 187 is a homicide.
Yeah,
You're
that's
killing
only
it.
one channel, yeah.
You're killing it. Exactly. You're killing it, Rick. 187. We got a 187. Last night was off the charts. You went over 1,200 people, 1,300 people viewing. I went, look at this guy. Rick's getting big. I'm just glad to be part of the show. Follow your dreams, Leo. I'm going to stay. Monty says stay. Trump save America. What's that got to do with me staying at my job? I'll read the comments later. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Leo.
Yeah.
Have a great night.
Bye, Liz.
See ya.
Okay. And I'm just going to say, yeah, I mean, we're all sitting here praying and hoping for peace in Ukraine. And I'm hoping things remain peaceful here at home, too. I mean, I hear people saying that they're ramping up something. Whatever it is you're ramping up for, folks, think very clearly and think hard before you take any action, because if you know, look at the bloodshed that we're witnessing in Ukraine, and then ask yourself, whatever it is that you think you want to achieve, do you want that same kind of thing here? I mean, I don't know. I'm exactly what the hell is going on out there, or what Leo was talking about, but I'm not in favor of that. So that's where I stand. Whatever the heck people are talking about that led to that conversation, I am absolutely opposed to any kind of violence, period. And we don't need to go there. So let's just stop with that crap, because we don't want what's going on in Ukraine to be happening here. Not needed, not necessary. There are solutions to our problems. That being said, yeah, it is. I'm amazed at how unqualified some of these guys running for president honestly are, and how ill-informed, quite frankly, especially on matters of foreign policy. I am flabbergasted at some of what I heard tonight from some of these candidates who really want to double down, like Tim Scott wanting to double down on degrading Russia's military force, making that really the objective of what's going on over there in Ukraine. Just a lot of ignorance, honestly, from people who really need to be better informed. And I'll tell you this, a lot of these guys are just talking, you know, blowing smoke and spewing hot air because they really don't know what's going on, in my view. And I think a lot of them really don't really know what's going on until they actually get elected and become president or become one of the finalists, because then they don't get the security briefings anyway. And until you actually have all the information, you can't really speak with full knowledge on any of these things. That's quite often, honestly, folks, why some of these guys say one thing when they're trying to get elected, and then they end up doing something completely different when they are elected, because the information that they get after they're elected from the intelligence agencies ends up being entirely different than what they think they know before they get into power. Now, that being said, we do know that those lettered agencies carry too much power. And honestly, it's very clear from history and from what we've seen in, recent months and days even, that these intelligence agencies manipulate things in ways that they ought not be manipulating them. So there is that danger as well, and they can certainly steer a president in the wrong way. So I guess with all that in mind, all we can do tonight is hope and pray for the best, and we'll keep on watching this, and we'll be back tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Liz, thank you for coming and joining me here on the program and backing me up tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. Pleasure is all mine. Folks, see you guys all tomorrow.
This has been a